You can sit here or there?
I never really liked sitting down.
Okay.
We could put our two stools closer to the front. We can move our chairs up front here. These.
Up here? Okay.
I noticed that we were ignoring all the people on the left.
About to get started. Everybody can come in, grab a seat.
All right, we're going to get started. Those people still eating bacon and sausage? Most of them probably my Jewish relatives out there. All right.
Yeah, thank you guys for a great night, and the energy has been amazing. Yeah, thank you. I couldn't walk by the bar last night without somebody, making me take a shot with them. So I'm a little slow this morning, but I'm getting there.
Yeah, and then the second step, more shots. No, it's been awesome. It's been so nice to have many of you walk up to us and thank us. And we're having as good a time as anybody, as we did on prior one conferences. Very importantly, we're going to have an announcement at 11:45. Michelle Day, our ultimate meeting planner, she's checking out more detailed weather information, flight information. As you notice, some flights are being canceled. Hotel reservations open at a discount here. Local hotels, if you want to stay over an extra night, that are closer and less expensive. And so if I didn't live so far away, you guys could stay at my place.
All right, so, we got a busy day, lots of good talks.
We want to stay on schedule.
We're very excited about. So this opening talk with Steve and I is really kind of an overview to what your whistle, like everything we're going to talk about is very, kind of quick overview, just to get you excited about what's going on, but don't worry, this isn't the only time you're going to be getting this information. A lot of the other speakers are going to kind of drill down on these topics. So we kind of sat down and thought, what are the coolest things that are happening in type 1 diabetes? And we're gonna go over those. So
we wrote down all the things that kind of happened since 2019, and oh my God. And Jeremy's right. We're gonna get into details the rest of the conference. So we're gonna give you an overview of the new world of type 1 diabetes.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So, just starting again, where are my type 1s at? So let's do this one more time. Raise your hand if you have type 1 diabetes, which is just, I always love it.
It feels so good.
Yeah. The people that don't raise their hand are feeling weird, that's great.
Hey, how many of you folks are here to support someone with type 1, but you don't have type 1 yourself?
Yeah.
And I promised myself I would not say if you're not a type 1, you're a loser, but no, you guys are the type 3 support people, which are so important.
Well, I just read on the news today that type 1 is actually highly contagious. So if you don't have it, maybe by the end of the weekend. So, but the legends, where are the legends in the room? The 25 years and over. So, yeah, that's me too. And this next slide is that we really need you legends to kind of teach us your ways, especially to the newbies that, God help them, are still using alcohol wipes. They're wiping down every injection site and every time they prick their finger. But we know that those go away pretty quickly. And
they change their lancets every time.
So then, now we're injecting through our shirts, and so it's good to show people like the things that you can kind of get away with, being a legend. How to MacGyver your Omnipod and suck insulin out of it. All these things that they don't kind of teach you. I bet there's people that are wearing a sensor for like 90 days in here. So how to jury rig it to work longer.
You pop it out with your credit card. You put it back in. You put it in the microwave for 2 hours on high.
And then you legends probably don't know what this thing is. This is a Sharps container where you're supposed to put your needles and things when you're done with it, but you probably use, a Tide thing now or whatever you use. And then, we probably forgot, what is this? This is a lancet. I don't remember changing one this decade. It's not a good manufacturing kind of like thing that they make these last.
How much do you use them?
I actually don't check my fingers like that much anymore, so these are completely out. So anyways, please learn from each other. That's kind of the point of this slide, that the conversations that happen here, obviously, hopefully you learn from, but you'll learn just as much, if not more, from the people just, kind of eating and hanging out and stuff like that. So we're going to talk a little bit kind of about basic information of type 1 diabetes first. So it's always important to say that most type 1s are the only one in their family with type 1 diabetes. So I'm the only one in my family, except for my brother Steve here. Steve's the only one in his family. So I got this black sheep, but I got type 1 diabetes on here because, look, he's got this earring and these like spiked, things. It looks pretty cool. So that's common though. People always say that, gosh, I'm the unlucky one, whatever. There was this kind of old myth that it would skip a generation. That's not true. Most people happen to be the only one in their family with it.
Yeah, it turns out 80% of us folks with type 1 do not have a family history. And that's really important when Justin Gregory speaks to you all tomorrow about TZIL and screening. So that's where you can do your part in getting these folks identified and offering them a potential good treatment.
Mm-hmm. So we're all the lucky ones, the cool black sheeps here. Now, the other thing that comes up a lot is that you can get type 1 at any age. So we always talk about it as, like it's only kids getting this disease. Steve had a patient, I think it was 80-something diagnosed?
88, yeah.
88 when she was diagnosed. So it's something else that people there's a lot of people that kind of gravitate towards TCOAD that got it later in life because maybe they didn't feel like, they had anywhere that they kind of belong, because pediatricians do a really good job of taking care of it. But when you're diagnosed as an adult, it's like, where do I go? People are misdiagnosed as type 2. They're started on medications that don't work. And then finally, they find their way to getting the right diagnosis. So if you're diagnosed as an adult, and I bet there's a lot of you here, who was diagnosed when they were over 18? Yeah, actually most of you. And so that kind of proves the point. And I bet a lot of you had some frustration or anger when with the diagnosis to get it. But you're here. So why do I have a pizza? Well, I like pizza, so that's it. There's this place called Pizza Port, which is, San Diego tradition, and that's what this is. So, and it's easy to cut in half. So half people can get it when they're less than 18, half can get it over than 18. So any time in your life.
Yeah, and that's important to know, because many doctors don't even know that. It's not just a childhood disease. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that when you get type 1 later in life, your pancreas, your beta cells work a little bit better and may be destroyed a little slower, and that's the LADA that some of you had, latent onset diabetes in adults. So but we're all type 1s. We're all blood brothers.
Mm-hmm. All right, so here's the bad news first. That every talk about type 1 diabetes has to talk about what's going on in the world. But then we're going to switch to the good news, so don't worry. So only 2 out of 10 people in the US get their A1C down less than 7. So that's not that great, right? That means that 80% of the people don't get their blood sugars to goal, and that doesn't mean that these people aren't working their butt off, taking shots and measuring glucose all the time. There's no disease like type 1 diabetes that requires all that work.
And when you do get it that low, at least in years past, if you're not on a hybrid closed loop, you got a ton of lows, dangerous lows. So it's not just that all us type 1s don't follow the rules. It's a tough condition to control.
And it's unlike anything else because, if you had pneumonia and it was out of control, you wouldn't blame yourself. When your blood sugars are high or low, there's really something personal about type 1 diabetes that you take it on I'm a failure, versus there's a lot of people struggling with this because it's hard to keep your blood sugars under control. Steve and I also struggle with this a lot.
I blame people who cough in my face when I get pneumonia. It's not my fault.
And then I'm going to talk about this. I have a weight management talk coming up, but actually 2 out of 3 type 1s are either overweight or obese. So we think about, kids running around and skinny, type 1s, but this is an issue that we actually have a whole talk dedicated to this.
There's an official definition of overweightness, and Jeremy will go through that. And it's been an issue. When you look at the weight of people with type 1 over time, it's going up. And I just think it's our society, it's, just getting older. There's a lot of reasons for it. Mm-hmm.
And then we still have bad lows. 1 out of 20 people will go to the ER or the hospital with a bad low each year, and about the same rate for diabetic ketoacidosis. So this is kind of the bad news, that it's a tough disease to control. We literally deal with the highs and the lows. So this is kind of what we're up against. Again, a great community here, but this is kind of what we're dealing with. So what this looks like in real time, I think when you go to, when you're frustrated with diabetes, you're probably not saying well, my A1C isn't exactly where you want. this is what's going on. So this is me just the other day, and I'm going along. It says Jeremy boluses for breakfast. I don't remember exactly what I ate. But then my blood sugars go high, you get mad, you do what we call a rage bolus, take a bunch more insulin than you should, or you trick your pump and tell it, you're eating more carbs or whatever it is, and then you go low, and maybe you don't even go that low, but you stuff your face or eat more than you should because you need it, right? And then your blood sugars blast off, and you repeat. And that is type 1 diabetes in a nutshell. That's the frustration of like the going up and going down, and even these little oscillations aren't that much, but even those require like all the mental effort and the thinking. Did I get my dose right? Did I eat too much?
I take it too early. Dr. Bader, Schaefer, and I are going to give a lecture Sunday morning, and we're going to let you be the endos. We're going to go through about 5 or 6 cases, and we're going to emphasize the postprandial spike. We call it the shark attack, and it's probably one of the most hardest thing to deal with as someone with type 1.
For sure. All right, so the struggle is real. So if you're out there saying, like this disease can really suck sometimes, it absolutely does. And I think that you should be able to admit that, and that, we all have our failures, and we're dealing with some tough stuff. But cheer up, here's some good news. And I Googled good news, and this came up. I don't know, these guys look, I don't know I have a lot of questions, actually.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If this monitor's right there, why do you keep looking over?
I didn't know it was here until just now. Yeah. I mean, did these guys know each other? Or did they just meet, but they're having a good time? So here's some of the good news. So basically, what's hot in type 1 diabetes? What can we use? What's on our side now to kind of combat these blood sugars? And I think we had like 4 different categories or so just to go through. But the first thing we want to talk about is technology. That, I'm sure most of you are on continuous glucose monitors or these hybrid closed loop pumps, but they keep evolving in a good way. It's like every day there's a new system, for us to keep up with.
Yeah, we got 5 hybrid closed loop systems now. They're all a little different, their algorithms are different, their form factors different, and I think it's important to have choices.
Yeah.
And they're all very, very good. They go on the concept of automatic insulin delivery.
So, before talking about where we're at now, I made this sophisticated chart, and you don't have to take my word for it. It says sophisticated chart at the top. So this is changes to my diabetes regimen over time. I was diagnosed in 94, 95 about that. And the point here is that for the first 10 years or so, things didn't really change. And I have the next slide of actually what I was using. But then things have just blown up, like I said. And you really have to keep on top of it, because it's very often you'll go to your provider and say, hey, I want to try X, Y, or Z, and they've never heard of it. And it's not that they're a bad physician or whatever, it's just that things are changing quickly. And that's why it's good for all of you to be here and educating yourself to really advocate for, hey, I heard about this or whatever. And really what we want is 2 things. We want better diabetes control, and we want to work less hard for it. And that's what we want diabetes or this technology to do, is just make my blood sugars good and make me just live without thinking about it.
Yeah, and saying that, the amount of advances have been exponential the last 5 years even. Just crazy. And for some of you on multiple daily injections, more power to you, as long as you got your CGM and your A1C is good. Everybody's different, and don't feel like you're not on a hybrid closed loop. You're a bad person. Don't be ashamed of that. Mm-hmm. So everyone uses the regimen that works for them.
So to know exactly my regimen, so when I was in the hospital, they sent me home with this thing. It's called the One Touch Basic, and I always joke that even was basic. They're this thing kind of sucks. What should we call it? I don't know, basic. If you guys remember this guy, so it took 45 seconds to get a reading, big drop of blood, and usually that reading after 45 seconds was error, and you had to take this thing off like an old computer mouse and clean it out. So 45 seconds, not the end of the world, right? But when you're a 15-year-old kid in high school trying to do this under your desk or whatever, real pain in the butt. Steve's biting his tongue, but he's boo-hoo, He had to do his urine tests, so... that's the thing, that the other point I always make, that with the legends and the newbies, it's so much changes throughout time, when the newbies are talking about, yeah, my CGM failed, and the legends are just oh my God, give me a break, We never had CGM, things like that.
Complaining about the 2-hour warm-up.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So that was 94, and then 2 years go by, and I get the One Touch Basic 2, you know? The marketing people here were just like blowing it out of the water. And this had a memory function on it, and the best thing about the memory function was, you know, you could sit in your endocrinologist's office and quickly go through the memory, and you had to write down in the book like what all your numbers were. And then, of course, they would say, this is all in the same pen, and I can tell that this is written backwards. But, like, I mean, do you really have to, like, write these things down? That was ridiculous.
Yeah, that's all we had.
So then, like, 10 years go by, and now I don't even know what these things are called, but things are smaller, they're a little less blood, a little quicker. What bothers me in these commercials, the number's always 104, 102, you know? It's like having, you know, that's your joke, that why can't it be like a 300 or something?
You're what? You know what? It's so true.
And then to go through this quickly, I had the Dexcom 7 Plus, the first CGM I had in 2010. And then it started kind of picking up between 2012 and 2015, the 4 and the Platinum and all that. Then the G6 and the G7. I've used the Eversense implantable sensor that we can talk about. So you guys have probably been on a similar trajectory where things are just changing quickly. And with each of these iterations, they're getting better, particularly going to the G6 when we didn't have to do finger sticks. You know, so I always tell the story when we had a patient in the hospital not that long ago, diagnosed with type 1, got them a Dexcom in the hospital. And I was like, this person might never really test their blood sugar, you know? So it was nice to witness like the death of, you know, this time period.
Yeah, and it's so nice that, you know, in our hospital, we're pretty up to snuff on things, and everybody gets a CGM in the first 24 hours. And
this is your picture.
I know, this is my picture. Yeah, this is my Sheffield urine test kit. When I was first diagnosed, you know, 10 drops water, 5 drops urine. The little blue pills are to measure glucose, the white ones to measure acetate. All you put in your logbook is either +1, +2, +3, or +4. You held it up to a color chart. The tube turned 1,000 degrees. How many of you folks used that thing? Look at that. Oh, look at these legends out here. But, you know, we've come a long way. And you know, this really wasn't that long ago. And then, of course, the next step was urine test strips. And you can just pee on a stick. And I don't know how you women did it, but for guys, it was pretty easy.
So that was the one slide that Steve asked that he could put in, like his I'm glad he did. And obviously here we are today. So if you guys haven't heard about these systems, you know, this is a great place to learn about them. We have breakout sessions today specifically talking about all these different systems. And then in the healthcare booth, all these people are represented. So we have the Omnipod 5, the Tandem Control IQ, and then the iLet, which is kind of the newest kit on the block. A couple people here at the conference have been using that. So these systems are fantastic. We call them hybrid closed loop, meaning they start to automate some insulin delivery. They don't do it all, you know, it's not like a set it and forget it thing. We don't have to bolus, not, you know, really yet. So we're getting there. And these systems have been really, really helpful. And here's another one called Loop. Anybody looping? Probably a bunch of loopers. This is not an FDA approved thing, but you can kind of hack your phone if you want to talk in the breakout sessions about that, how to do that. This is a system that Steve's been using. Basically with the Omnipod, it does, you know, essentially what the Omnipod 5 does in a little bit of a different way. So if you're like seeing these pictures for the first time, like what are these systems?
Yeah.
You absolutely need to educate yourself. If you're already on one of them, learning tips and tricks of the different modes that you can use and settings and things like that to get the most out of these, because they really can be helpful. And where they're really the most helpful is overnight.
They help almost eliminate your lows, almost. You know what, some of you have not looked at the schedule, may have not looked at the schedule yet, but we have 2 workshops. The first one is hybrid closed loop for people who are not on them but interested. And then the second one is more advanced. So make sure you go to the session that is most appropriate for you.
So if you guys aren't familiar with looking at these, this is a Dexcom download. And the point I'm trying to make is that this is somebody's average blood sugar from midnight to midnight. And these gray bars are how much variation they have at that time. And you can see that on these systems, they kind of do whatever they need to do overnight. So when people are waking up, they're in range and consistently in range. And we all know when you wake up at 110, 120, it's just going to be a much better day than waking up at 300. And then guess what? We're back in control and everything goes to hell again. But these systems can really, really be helpful.
Is this which is the pointer? Yeah. Right. just for you guys, Jeremy's saying going to bed really high. And this just overnight, when we're not screwing up our own diabetes, you come down, wake up with a great number, standard deviation, variability is minimal. And, yeah, and then the rest of the day is up to you. But if you look at these numbers up here, they're not bad. They're not some of the best ones I've seen. But think about that, and look how little low this person has.
So something to consider for sure. This technology has been a huge breakthrough and it keeps getting better.
It makes our clinic at UCSD so much easier. Someone comes on these systems, everything's perfect. And I pretty much keep a list of what their favorite Peloton instructor is, because there's nothing else to talk about. I write it in the notes, and then I come back and say, how's Cody Rigsby doing? And they, oh, you remember.
All right, so definitely knowing about technology. New insulins, we can go through this a little bit faster. So for those not on pumps, and again, nothing wrong with that. There are two newer basal insulins called Tresiba and Toujeo. So if you take a basal insulin, probably Lantus, you should really think about getting on one of these because they're better basal insulins. They're more consistent. They have less hypoglycemia. So definitely ask your doctor, your healthcare provider about these because they've been around for a while. So this isn't like going to be a tough thing to get covered. Also, there's two new rapid-acting insulins, and the names of these, it's always fun. So we got Fiasp and Lyumjev. And these are basically like the newer versions of Novolog and Humalog, respectively. They work a little bit faster, and I really do mean like a little bit. So you might not have quite as high of a spike after eating. And you can put them in vials and put them in pumps. So it's something also to try. Sometimes people come back and say, I noticed no difference, but other times people say like it makes actually a big difference.
Yeah, it gets out of your system a little faster too. So yeah, these are all incremental benefits with fast acting, but I would just want to emphasize these Toujeo and Tresiba, they are significantly better than Lantus or Levemir.
Yeah. Significantly.
So you need to learn about that more today from other speakers.
Yeah, I think I'm doing a breakout session on this too.
That's right, he's doing it on the session. So.
And inhaled insulin, Afrezza, just a real game changer. So when you talk to people about Afrezza, they either love it and use it all the time or have never heard about it. Like there's an inhaled insulin, what's that about? So I'm going to do a whole session again on this. The beauty of Afrezza is it's inhaled, but we're used to doing injections, so that's not that big.
In California, we're used to it.
Yeah. It works like almost immediately. So nothing comes close to how quickly Afrezza works in bringing your blood sugars down, in kind of combating high-carb meals. So if it's something that you don't know about, it's an actually really useful tool that you can use for all your meals. You can use it on top of pumps. I'll do a whole session on that.
It helps with that situation of rising after eating.
Yeah. And then glucagon, I think we kind of forget about it, that we've had that old red suitcase glucagon forever, that if you guys ever need to use it, it's usually in a bad situation, you have to look at the instructions because there's a vial with powder in there and you have to mix it up. And it's actually a problem because you need to use this in emergencies. So everybody here should have a prescription for glucagon. And the two new ones are this one called, again, these names, Baqsimi, which is a nasal glucagon. So God forbid Steve passed out, I could, shoot this into his nose.
No, thanks.
Yeah. Sometimes I do it when he's sleeping just to mess with him. But so you don't have to breathe it in or anything like that. It goes right in the nose. The Gvoke is pre-mixed. You can actually do it through your clothes or whatever. You don't see the needle, you just push it down. So it's these are much more effective and efficient ways to get people glucagon in the event that you need it. And you actually, these are for emergencies, but you can give yourself glucagon. If you're in a situation where you're having a bad low and you're eating and you're not recovering, you give yourself.
Yeah, it's just amazing. It's like an EpiPen. You pull off the tip, spring loaded, it's done. And when your loved ones or you're having a bad low, it makes a huge difference. It has an expiration of 2 years too. I think last time I demoed my old glucagon kit, it was 2004 expired.
So again, some other sessions we're going to do on this, but what about other medications for people with type 1 beyond insulin to control our blood sugars? And why do I have pictures of all these people? Anybody know? It's because they're all taking Ozempic. And everybody in everybody in Hollywood is on this, kind of like wonder medication to help people lose weight. But there's a lot of evidence now that maybe people with type 1 can use this, especially if people are overweight, which I already mentioned is a very common problem. So looking beyond insulin is another big wave of like research. We're always going to need insulin, and God bless it, but using other things like Ozempic and other like pills that I'll talk, a lot about. Justin Gregory's doing a whole session on this of, thinking beyond insulin to help us lose weight, to help us control our blood sugars with heart disease, all these kinds of things. I'm sick and tired of the type 2s getting all the good stuff.
I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming.
So here's, Ozempic is the one on top and Wegovy the one on the bottom. Again, I'll talk more about this. So these are, Ozempic is for diabetes, Wegovy is specifically for weight loss and obesity. So people with type 1 can use these meds.
And the drugs like the SGLT2 inhibitors like Jardiance, Farxiga, incredible. They help your diabetes control, not as much as these and not as much with the weight, but congestive heart failure and especially slow down the progression of chronic kidney disease, which is pretty common in anybody with diabetes.
So then the last category is, of course, cure, or these kind of cure-based approaches. And I think, I don't know, we've kind of adopted this idea, well, we have the disease, we're going to do the best we can about it, but where are we in terms of curing it? And this was actually a big year, the last year or so. We had our first ever approved drug called teplizumab, to help delay the onset of type 1. So not for us old-timers that already have it, but for kids, our siblings that might be at risk for it, of actually delaying the onset. And we're going to do a whole session about that. But that's the first time we've ever had a drug ever to do something about the disease itself. Everything else we just talked about was kind of blood sugars and the symptoms of the disease. But what about the immune disease itself and restoring the pancreas?
Well, they've cured 300 laboratory models of type 1, never in a human. So it is big news, the first disease-modifying drug, and I think it just opens the door for all kinds of therapy. And on this slide, this is important, Jeremy. Go through that.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on here. But basically, what this is that this is the point where everybody was kind of diagnosed with type 1 diabetes right here. And now we're looking at all these stages of kind of what maybe you would call pre-diabetes, when people are at risk. We can measure antibodies, again, in our relatives to see if they're at risk, to do something to try to prevent them from actually developing type 1. And then when people are actually diagnosed with type 1, they still have like 10 to 20% of their beta cells left. So some of you newbies that are diagnosed in the last couple of years, you're probably still making some insulin, and that's worth holding on to, maintaining. So a lot of research in this area to help people kind of preserve what they have left. So again, this is preventing over here, preservation. And then for Steve and I and you guys out there that have had it for a long time, we don't have any beta cells. So what's going on in terms of actually stem cell infusions and kind of restoring islet function? So anytime you read a news story about they've cured type 1 diabetes or there's research going on, blah, 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 it's helpful to think about it in these buckets. Are we talking about preventing it in people that don't have it? Are we talking about preserving it, people that are just diagnosed? Or are we talking about some way of giving cells back to people just like us?
Yeah, and there's people from Vertex, which is a company that is now studying all kinds of ways to infuse viable beta cells that they can synthesize in a lab. They don't have to go to, human beta cells. And it's amazing technology, and that's really for all of us who are way past the diagnosis stage.
Yeah.
That's very exciting. And they're working on ways to avoid the need for immunosuppressants, and some of their therapies do involve immunosuppressants, but at a lower level, much less side effects.
So we actually have a research panel coming up today that I'm moderating. My good friends Justin and Leslie, they're endocrinologists that do a lot of research, and then Aaron Kowalski, who's the CEO of JDRF, giving us an update on what's going on in all these different buckets, because there actually is a lot. So, it used to be a couple years ago talking about research in type 1 was kind of like, wah, wah. But now, there's a lot going on.
And Aaron, people just asking for money all day long.
All right, so listen up. So, if you were dozing off, this is probably one of the most important things that I'll say. And I actually said it yesterday, is that, type 1s are living longer than people without diabetes. And that's worth a round of applause again. So I don't know about you guys, but when I was diagnosed, they said, well, you just lost 15 years off your life. And I was like, thanks, I'm 15 years old. That's cool. I was But it's not true anymore that, like we are living longer and healthier because of things like this, educating yourself, taking care of not just your blood sugars, but, your cholesterol and what you eat and exercise, all that stuff that you're doing, the work, it matters. So you will be around on this earth for a long time if you keep doing it. So with that in mind, I have to close it off by saying, one of my famous quotes is that, well, sometimes you have to say F it. With all that we do and everything we just talked about, and the pumps and the sensors and everything that we wear, fantastic that like this is all happening. But gosh, sometimes you just have to realize that things are just going to go a little bit sideways. So this was me the other day. I ate an acai bowl. I love these things. I don't even know what acai is. It's this like purple goop
Sweet
from the heavens. About 3,000 calories in here. And, then, I kind of had some pizza and a beer. And my blood sugar, of course, went up like 252. And I was like, well, that's a bummer. But I said, F it. And then I had a donut. And so that's how that's done. And so the point here is that, we're all doing our best. There is a ton going on in type 1 diabetes. Take advantage of all the things that you can use, like new technology, insulin, maybe other medications that we're going to talk a lot more about. But then I'll also embrace that you're working really hard, and this disease can be tough sometimes.
Yeah, and use this weekend to really get up to snuff. And I should also remind everyone that, both of our control is good now, thanks to technology. And you're not going to get complications when your blood sugar is high for days, weeks even, and sometimes months. It takes years and years. So, if you bounce up here and there, don't beat yourself up. Mm-hmm. Let's go get some donuts.
Okay. All right, we're done. Okay, we'll see you guys a little bit later.
Come on up, Bill.
Oh.
I'm going to do a short introduction of Dr. William Polonsky. You know how Michael Jordan, it's just by the first name, or Tiger, Tiger. Jeremy is just only one Jeremy. And there's only one Bill. And Bill has devoted his career, literally, to the behavioral issues of diabetes, both type 1 and type 2. And he has probably more publications than this than anybody else, but he also has a degree that there's only 3 people in the world that have this degree, the honorary diabetes degree. It's knowing what it's like to have diabetes, but not having it yourself. And Dr. Ian Bloomer is here, and also Tricia Santos. And so, Bill, enjoy. It's a great crowd. They laugh at almost anything. Okay.
Thanks. All right, can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Steve, for the great intro. Yeah, I'm one of the losers. I don't have type 1, so excuse me. But I've been a diabetes psychologist for 35 years. I've had the chance to meet and work with thousands of folks living every day with type 1, and I've learned a lot from them. So I want to share some of the things I've learned. And as a psychologist, especially when I look at this title, it still amazes me. I meet so many people who are in the world of type 1 diabetes. Either they have it or they have loved ones who still say, really? There's an emotional side of diabetes? Really? That's kind of, especially this is true often of family members and friends. Like, what? What's the big deal? Just do what you're supposed to do. Get your act together. But we know that's not exactly true. And if you're going to be able to be successful, as so many of you are, and living well with diabetes every day, we have to take a look at this emotional side and figure out how do you really manage it and handle it and make it work for you as opposed to against you. But we know this can be a challenge, and one of the biggest challenges is when you think about this emotional side, how do I talk about that and share that with other people? And we can know that can be a problem because lots of times people might not get it, or it can be a little overwhelming for our loved ones as well. And so we want to think about this in 2 parts. One is like, so what's going on? What is this emotional side, and what do we do about it? And oh my God, of course, we could talk all day about that. Thank goodness I get to do some breakout sessions, and I'll be here the whole time. I'm going to hopefully learn from so many of you what you've learned and what works for you. So here's what we know about the elements of what can be challenging when we think of the emotional side of diabetes. Now, none of this is going to be a big surprise to anybody here at all. But we just want to acknowledge what all of you know, because what a weird experience it is to be here, because it's so rare that you realize, I'm not the only one going through this. There's other people. So we know that number one, the biggest issue, when we interview people with type 1 around the world, the biggest issue, and we say, what drives you crazy, although it's changed a bit over the years, is what we call, as you know, the 24/7 problem. I'm exhausted by this job where there's no breaks, there's no vacations, you get to do it forever. Even people on hybrid closed loop pumps talk about this, right? So it can wear you down. We know that also it's easy to get discouraged, when you don't have awesome glucose levels all the time. I did the exact same thing today that I did yesterday. What do you mean? Things are bouncing up and down for no earthly reason. And sometimes it's unclear what it is, and you end up kind of beating yourself up for it. So we need to talk about that. By the way, is that familiar? Anyone ever felt discouraged with it? Oh, just want to make sure I'm in the right room. Thank you. So it looks like the majority of you understand. We also know it's easy to feel down on yourself and even feel ashamed. Like I'm sure many of you have gone to see your healthcare provider, and it's like, well, let's review your records and see how you're doing with your diabetes. And it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't look at those numbers, and maybe I'll just come back in a few months instead. But there is this kind of patronizing sense of, I'm here to blame you and shame you, and you can do it to yourself as well. And again, as Steve and Jeremy mentioned, type 1 diabetes is so weird. It's very odd. We don't blame and shame people, just like Steve said, for getting pneumonia or not taking perfect care of their blood pressure. But yet there's so much blaming and shaming. Like, why aren't you doing a better job managing your diabetes? What's going on? It's unnecessary. We also know it's easy just to get despairing and start to feel hopeless and helpless that this disease is going to get me. How wonderful what you saw, that quote that Jeremy put up, that, we know that you can live a long and healthy life with type 1 diabetes. Boy, when I started in 1987, we definitely didn't know that. I still remember the first person who ever came to see me in my office, and people would come to me, and I had no idea why they were there, and he walked in, and I said, how can I help you today? And he goes, well, today's my birthday. I just turned 30 years old, which is a really strange reason to go to see a psychologist, by the way. And so being a well-trained, sensitive psychologist, I said, of course, happy birthday. And I said, well, how can I help you? And he said, no, you don't understand. I was told I wouldn't live past the age of 30. What do I do now? I'm fine, It was an odd way to appreciate the good news, but he had been, like many of you, had been told, this is not going to be good for you, right? So, there's still this sense of despair. This disease is going to get me. And so let's talk about that a bit as well in a minute. We also know, I'm sure many of you can appreciate, that despite our new technology, which some of you are on, some of you are not, there's an ongoing concern about lows. I mean, the number one thing that can haunt you and keep everybody from having awesome glucose levels all the time is an understandable, sometimes understandable, concern about lows. It can be scary, and it can be extremely scary, and we meet many people for whom their worries about lows runs their lives. What we call the hypoglycemic fear syndrome. So they tend to keep their blood sugars elevated all the time because they aren't just worried about lows, they've had such oftentimes a bad experience that they literally are having what we call a phobic response, right? It's like being terrified of all the other things you can imagine someone being frightened of. So they stay high because they're so desperately frightened they could ever even remotely go low. And that's probably, at this point, the majority of the people who come to see me in my office, where they're really struggling. They don't want to have high blood sugars all the time, but they're too scared to ever let their blood sugars get too low. And when I say too low, for most of my patients, it's like, oh my God, I certainly couldn't let my blood sugars drop below 200. Or I'm actually wearing a CGM, and if I ever see a down arrow, oh my God, I better eat everything in sight, right? So it can run your life, this fears about lows. So we'll again talk about that. The good news is, by the way, for all these issues I'm bringing up, we have solutions, right? We know that there's ways of overcoming these and doing fine, like many of you have already discovered. And then the biggie, of course, is sometimes all of these emotional challenges become so big that people just say, that's it. And they go through what we call diabetes burnout. And when you talk about burnout, it means things are so bad that they say, I'm checking out. right? I'm going to do the minimum. I'm not going to really focus and pay attention to my diabetes. I'm just going to ignore it as much as possible. It doesn't really matter what happens to me anyway. I'm just kind of doomed. My actions don't seem to make a difference. What the heck? And this reminds me of a funny story I want to mention, that years ago I had a publisher come to myself and a couple of our colleagues, and they said, we really want you to write a book, and we have a great idea for this book. And I got super excited because I loved the title. And it was called, it was supposed to be called Diabetes for the Disengaged. And I went, wow, that is a really awesome title. And I actually put together a little content list, what we would cover. But then I realized something. I went back to the publisher and I went, you know, you're a publisher. You actually want to do this to make money. I'm not too worried about that, but you actually want to make money with this book. You do understand, you're asking us to write a book for a population of people who, by definition, are never going to buy it. So this is a crazy idea. And they went, oh yeah, never mind, forget it. But it remains a big issue, right? I mean, it's a huge issue. And some of you might have been to this place where you just have said, I just can't deal with it anymore. And thank goodness you're here, right? And of course, it isn't just people with diabetes for whom there's an emotional side. It's your loved ones, again, family members and friends who are here today. And we have a whole special session for you today, again, for folks with what Steve and Jeremy call type 3 diabetes. Sometimes I like to refer to them as the diabetes police, as many of you know, who always are coming from a place of love. That's why we call them loved ones. But they also can be extremely concerned. And one of their biggest concerns also is about fear of hypoglycemia. In fact, we've done many studies to show that family members and friends are more frightened about lows than most people who are living every day with type 1. They're way more freaked out. And it's often unappreciated how many spouses and partners in particular really suffer from significant insomnia because they're so worried about lows. Now, technology has helped a lot, but it hasn't really taken care of this completely. How many family members know about being freaked out about lows, by the way? Anybody? Okay, good. So if any of this sounds familiar, the most important thing to tell you, this is normal. So all these sort of emotional challenges, we refer to as what we call diabetes distress. And we know that if you're ever been struggling with any of these things, I promise you, I swear to you, this is normal. And that's probably the most important thing I want to say about this. Because again, many people who have gone through periods of struggling with this emotional side of diabetes don't realize how normal it is. They just think that it's just me. And when they discover, as you will discover throughout today and tomorrow, how many of us have been there, have struggled with the same things, it's such a huge relief to know that it's not just me. And of course, when I list all those emotional elements, I just picked a few, right? There's a lot more we can all think of. Things have changed over the course of years. You know, when I interview people now, here in the, 2023, and I ask people what drives them crazy about diabetes, that one of the biggest things I hear that I certainly never heard before is having to deal with PBMs and insurance companies and getting my supplies covered, month to month. You know, how many of you, I mean, I won't even ask you, but, you know, month to month, I still have to prove I have type 1? Are you kidding? I mean, really? Do you think it's vanished? And we have, again, tons of research. We've been researching, I think our first paper came out in 1995, and learned about diabetes distress around the world. And we know that, number one, it's extremely common. We know that high levels of diabetes distress occur in about 40 to 45% of people with type 1 diabetes. By the way, that compares to, say, significant depression or anxiety, which is a problem, but that's only about 8% maybe. So diabetes distress, high levels are extremely common. And we know that one of the things they're important about is that they make managing diabetes more difficult. Okay? We know that high levels of diabetes distress are related to elevated A1Cs, poor time and range, things like that. By the way, I'll get to that in a minute. By the way, if you're interested in, I wonder how I would score, how do I compare to other people? Is diabetes distress an issue for me? If you want to, you can always just go to this website. You can do it on your phone. You can do it right now, diabetesdistress.org, and it'll show you a little page like this, and you can fill out well, we have a lot of diabetes distress scales now, but I think we only have 2 or 3 on available right now where you can fill it out and get immediate feedback, summary feedback about what's my score, not only how distressed I am, but what's driving me crazy, and does that fit for me? And oftentimes it's very surprising to see these things. So when I meet people, I usually have them fill this scale out immediately, and we use this as a conversation starter. Like, oh, now I understand better about what's driving you crazy. Tell me more about that. So feel free to check this out, and if you see some crazy score, you can find me anytime over the course of the next day and say, what's going on? So it's one thing that could be useful for you. Again, I want to highlight there is a very, very wide variety of people who are here today, right? So some of you are really struggling with the emotional side of diabetes. Some of you are thinking, what are you talking about, Bill? This is crazy. I'm fine. You know, we're people here today who are here because they are way up to date with the technology of diabetes. They're ready to fine-tune things. There are some people here who may not even know some of those letters that you heard Steve and Jeremy talk about, right? Like, what does that CGM thing stand for? What does that A1C thing stand for? What's DKA? And we make the assumption that everybody knows those, but not necessarily. So if you don't ask questions, please ask, say, what are you talking about? You know, this is a chance to get your questions answered here. But again, even with that emotional side, there's this huge difference, but we have such a chance to learn from each other. I thought I'd just mention how this is linked to outcomes, just for this quote from one of our old friends, Stephanie. Stephanie Edwards works at Lilly, and she was interviewed recently, and she said this, you know, sometimes the biggest obstacle to dealing with what's going on with my pancreas is to deal with what's going on in my head. So this emotional side often is very related to how am I doing? How am I, to what degree am I being successful with my diabetes? Now, Stephanie is someone who I bet if I asked Steve or Jeremy, they go, who is this Stephanie? I've never even heard of her. Why are you not mentioning some famous person? I've never heard of her. So Steve, Jeremy, here's us with Stephanie at some bodega in Barcelona a few years ago, along with some of our other colleagues. But this is someone who's just like everyone else here understands there's this link between my pancreas and how I think about this emotional side. So why is it such a big deal? Well, you know this. Number one is because living with type 1 diabetes every day is a job, as I already mentioned. You know it's this 24/7 issue where there's no breaks, no vacations. You get to do it forever. And it's a frickin' balancing act, right? Where you don't want to have your blood sugar's too low, too high. But it's that vigilance, it's that effort, it's having to think about it. And again, I've been impressed with people on hybrid closed-loop systems. As awesome as they are, for many people, it's more effort. Maybe the results are better, but you're even thinking about it oftentimes even more. So we still have work to do, I think, to find that balance, as Jeremy mentioned, between wanting to have awesome results, but also not wanting to have to think about this all the time. We also know that a big reason why the emotional side of diabetes can be such a big problem is the old thoughts and deeply held beliefs we have about diabetes, what a big role they can play. Oftentimes these are things we learned when we were first diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. But they're things like you see here. I meet people all the time, and the biggest thing going on with them is they feel like they have to be perfect with their diabetes. They say, whatever I'm doing probably isn't good enough, which gets to an important issue about how things have changed over the course of years over what is your target and your goal. People feeling still that my life's going to be cut short by my diabetes. There's no way I can live a long and healthy life. Like that first patient I met, I'm going to lose years. And it's my fault if my numbers aren't quote unquote good. And of course, one of the biggest problems is we still keep calling glucose numbers good and bad, or high and low. That's ridiculous. I like to think of your time in range, your A1C, is simply indicating whether at this moment you're in a safe place with your diabetes or an unsafe place. But we need to throw out all the shame attached to things like good and bad. It's ridiculous. So what can you do about this? So, we've been doing intervention studies, again, for 30 years, trying to look at exploring, and we've learned a lot about how to successfully address the emotional side of diabetes. But I thought I should approach you more humbly, and I said, look, I know a lot, but who else in the world can we turn to who might be able to tell us about the emotional side, who might know more than me and it might be helpful? And I thought about it and I realized there is one person who knows more, and I thought I better check in. And that person is actually ChatGPT. And so I went to ChatGPT and I asked this question. Hey, I got this big group of people I'm going to get to talk to. What are the most important things you'd want to tell someone with type 1 about the emotional side? And oh my Lord, good old ChatGPT had a lot to tell me. But the big ones are things that we've already talked about. We're going to talk about a bit more now. The fact that if you're having tough time managing diabetes, those emotions are valid. The importance of having a healthy support system, people in your life who are rooting for you, appreciating the psychological impact that we'll get to, and being compassionate with yourself. And boy, the list went on and on. ChatGPT was just very verbose. Jeez, it just went on. But I was glad to see that good old Chat kind of agreed with me. So I thought that was kind of cool. It made me feel better about being with you here today. So here's what you can do. Number one, and again, I come to you with humility. Many have already learned this. Number one, get some freaking perspective about this. And again, I think we heard that all from Steve and Jeremy. If you've ever had a tough time managing diabetes, if you've ever felt discouraged and depressed and freaked out, welcome to the club, right? Everybody's been there. Again, when we have people fill out our diabetes distress scale, I can tell you from the times we've done this in big studies, we keep finding that no one seems to score 0 on our measures. Everybody can tell you something. Oftentimes, when I travel around the world, I ask people, tell me one thing about diabetes that's driving you crazy. I've still never met anybody who went, I can't think of anything, I'm good, thanks. So, and again, I can tell you the majority of people I've seen all the time, but especially over the past 6 months who come to want to see me and deal with any emotional issue, I say, you know what? You need to come to the One Conference. You need, not me, you need to meet your brethren, right? Your blood brothers, the people who know what's going on. What we're doing here this weekend, I think is the best thing ever. I love this. I'm so glad we're all back together. So, yeah. So, it's just so glad to see you all. So we want to chat and we want to laugh with each other about this crazy, crazy disease. And many of you are not shy, so I hope if you haven't had the opportunity already, please take the risk of meeting other people who are around here today. Introduce each other, say hello. Ask them what's driving them crazy about diabetes. And for those of you feeling a little uncomfortable, a little shy, maybe you're from out of town, don't realize what these crazy Californians are all about, again, take the risk of just saying hello. And when I think about that, it's sort of this mental set. You want to move from paranoia. I used to live on the East Coast, so I know what paranoia was like. Presuming that everybody's out to get you, right? So don't take the risk of talking to everyone. To, in fact, moving to what is actually known in the scientific literature as not paranoia, but pronoia. And many have never heard the term pronoia. It's the coolest term in the world. Pronoia. It's that strange, creeping feeling that everyone's out to help you. I want to live in that world, right? Isn't that cool? So you should be thinking about that throughout your time here today. Everyone in this room is out to help you. So please greet each other, say hello, meet someone new this weekend. It's the most important thing I think you can possibly do. There's another important issue about when we think about getting some freaking perspective about that, and that's something else that Steve and Jeremy also talked about. Many of us have seen way too many of announcements and things like this, right? Blindness. Diabetes is the leading cause of new cases of blindness among adults, age 20 to 74. Okay, there's something I want to tell you about this and something I'm sure you're going to hear. I hope, Steve, I can see you standing there. I hope you agree. This is wrong, okay? You may have heard this. Diabetes is the leading cause of kidney failure. Actually, that's not true, okay? What is true is, well, out of control of diabetes is the leading cause of these issues. But well-controlled diabetes is the leading cause of nothing. Nothing. Right? And in studies past, it's nuts, right? So now, usually I would come to Boria, I use the same slides all the time, where I present all the evidence. I go, look, here's the truth. Here's actually the evidence of what we really know. But I just couldn't do it again. Most of you have probably heard it and then you're sick of it. But we know this is a fact. If you don't, we have a lot of experts here today. We can ask them all over and over again this one question. But let's be clear about this. The evidence is clear. This doesn't mean, as you see on the left side of your screen, that with good care that we can guarantee that you'll never develop complications, or if you've already developed significant complications that you won't get. But this does mean, with good care, odds are pretty good you can live a long and healthy life with diabetes, period. Okay? We can say that here in the 21st century as a fact. When I meet people who are freaked out that diabetes is going to get them, I got to go, oh, that's so 20th century of you. Because it used to be true, okay? But it is a new world, you know. And again, we have such a mixed group here. We have people here who have been complications-free for many years, and they're new to diabetes. There's other people who have been actually hit hard by complications, right? And are doing their best to live well, like Dr. Elman. So there's so many of us here, but there's the idea of what we call evidence-based hope is critical. That with good care, odds are pretty good, we're all going to be fine. So, and don't even believe me. Again, we have the top experts in type 1 diabetes here with us today. Let's just badger them constantly until you believe it. We also know this is important. What you can do is you can give yourself a freaking break about this as well. You know, because of our technology, sometimes people feel like they've got to do, 70% time in range isn't good enough, 80% might be better, 85%, oh, that's really what I need to aim at. How come I'm not at 90%? My goodness, even with our technology now, you cannot do diabetes perfectly, and you don't have to, right? That's what we talk about. What's your target? What's your goal? What are you trying to reach? How do you know when you can say, I'm in a safe place, or as safe as I can be or need to be, given this funny balance between I'd like to do as well as I can and I don't want to think about diabetes at all. And it's finding that middle ground that's really important. But you don't have to do it perfectly. You can't. And you don't have to do everything. You know, one of my set of my colleagues actually put together this chart. They did this lovely report, and they said, what's the stuff people living with a chronic disease like type 1 diabetes have to think about and do on a regular basis? What is that stuff? How is that unique? And they put this together in this chart, in this article they wrote, and they called it the taxonomy of burden, just to list all the extra things you want to do to stay healthy and well with type 1, type 1 diabetes, but other illnesses, chronic illnesses. And that chart looks like this. Where is it? So now this is not a picture of a retina, okay? This is actually a list of all the stuff you should be thinking and doing on a regular basis. Now, you can't read this. And it's not because there's something wrong with your eyes. The print is too freaking small. I mean, I can't tell what this is, and I've used magnifying glasses. It is amazing. The bottom line is I put this up here just to remind you, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. But you can't do it all. We pick and choose every day. We're going to all do the best we can. But you don't have to do everything. You want to highlight some of those things that are reasonable for you. And that number one means, do you have a target? Have you and your healthcare provider sat down and say, what does it mean to be in a safe place with your diabetes? Maybe that's an A1C number, or maybe that's a time in range number, right, or something else. How do you know when it's good enough so that you can relax? You know, I've been talking a lot with some of you about what we call how the goalposts keep moving, right? Like, oh, if I'm doing this well, maybe I should do better and better and better and better. The lower the better, the lower the better. But eventually, maybe you're okay. And for many of us, we're uncomfortable with that. That's why it's important to talk to your healthcare provider. And since you can't do everything, when you're trying to make some positive change, it's way more important to think about, well, what's one thing or two things I can do? The idea of doing one step at a time is what's critical. And when oftentimes people come to see me, they go, oh my God, I just don't even know how to approach this problem. There's so much I have to do. And really what we have to do is figure out what's the one step that you can take that can make the biggest difference, the bang for your buck approach, as opposed to thinking of everything. Because if we start with just one thing, we're likely to be effective. And finally, the last thing I want to mention, which comes back to the first thing, is my goodness, don't do diabetes alone. If there's one thing all of our scientific evidence shows, if you're ever trying to make and maintain a behavior change for anybody, whether you have type 1 diabetes or not, when you got somebody in your life who's rooting for you, who cares about you, just like many of you have here today, it's way easier to be successful. But of course, you want people in your life who are rooting for you and caring about you in the right way. Because many of you have people who are rooting for you and are caring about you way too much. And that's where the issue of the diabetes police comes in, right? And so a lot of what we'll talk about today and hopefully even tomorrow is what does it mean to be supporting your loved ones in a way that makes sense, right? That really is going to be helpful, that isn't too much. You know, we've moved from worrying about, some of you may have seen our diabetes etiquette cards, which you can see online on our website. Now we want to talk about Dexcom share etiquette, right? So what do you do if you're sharing and following your glucose numbers with someone else? So, but you want to have people in life who care about you. You want to meet up with people who actually get it. Where would you find people like that? Oh, that's right here. So again, by far the most important thing, if you want to begin to think about and address better the emotional side of diabetes, don't talk to me, talk to each other. Meet someone new here today, meet someone new tomorrow, meet someone new tonight. Talk to your friends. We all can learn from each other about what's driving us crazy and what are the solutions that so many of you found. And I'm hoping today I'm going to learn from many of you, not just about what's been tough, but what you've all figured out. So again, if you're having a tough time managing your diabetes, you're not alone. Sometimes it's nice just to hang out with other people who are just as feeling as miserable and overwhelmed as you are. But that's the beginning of how we find solutions as well. So I just want to thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to many of you later today. I'll be around in a couple of weeks. Thanks. Yeah. Take a seat.
Nice job, buddy.
Thanks. You want this?
Yes, thank you, Bill. Well, I think Dr. Pettis needs no introduction. He's going to talk on a very important topic on weight management for people with type 1. And he was supposed to be here at 9:30. I don't know where he is.
All right, here we go! Woo! Yes! Thanks, buddy. Yeah, love you. Woo! That really took it out of me. Thank you, everybody. Yes. All right. Thank you. All right, cut it, Eric. Don't worry, I'm not going to keep this shtick going the whole time, but you know, it was fun for the introduction there. So, I am still Jeremy Pettis. I might be adopting this new lifestyle tracksuit guy, though. I really like this. It's a lot of fun. So we're talking about weight management, and I actually am a little out of breath. So forgive me. Clearly, my body's a temple. You know, I'm a physical specimen. So why are we talking about this? I kind of, hinted in the beginning that this is a big problem for people with diabetes, for everybody without diabetes, but for people with type 1. And I have some slides. So why do I have this guy here? So this is Wilford Brimley, and you can just hear him saying diabetes, because he was like kind of the type 2 spokesman forever. And, when people think, like conceptually lay people about, diabetes, they kind of put people in these buckets. Type 2s, it's the Wilford Brimleys, they're the ones that struggle with weight and, obesity. So that's what we really need to be kind of thinking about. And type 1s, what do we got? And we got Nick Jonas and other people like him, So these are kind of the buckets we get put into. Oh, you're type 1, so you must be, kind of more on the Nick Jonas spectrum. And then I just Googled, type 1 diabetes, exercise or something like that, or maybe weight, and guess, what pictures I get? So God bless these people that they're doing their thing, but they've got their pod and their sensors here. Like our number one problem with type 1 diabetes is that we're too shredded, that we, we just love running so much, and we're always doing this move for some reason. I don't know why. So we're all shredded, right? So the talk's over. Hit me, Eric. Yeah! Talk's over. Thanks for coming. We're all good. Everything's done. We're all shredded. Okay, kill it. So you're probably thinking, well, that can't be right. When I Google these people, I don't really look like them. Like, is that really what's going on? Or it's like everybody that's shredded, or is it just me? And the truth is, as we already mentioned, that isn't right. So I said earlier that 2 out of 3 people with type 1 diabetes are either overweight or obese. So, that's a pretty big statistic. That's actually pretty similar to just kind of people without diabetes in general. And I know what you're all doing right now, since you're probably sitting next to somebody. You're all doing one of these, Is it that guy? Oh, it's me. Oh, no. She's pretty thin. It's me and this guy then. But don't worry about it, because we're all in the same boat. So first of all, what does it mean to be overweight or obese? So we all kind of throw those terms around. I'm overweight, I need to lose weight. But these actually have definitions. And it's important to know these because they matter, especially when we get down the road in terms of getting medications and what kind of category you're actually in. So everybody can do an online calculator. You can just do BMI calculator. And sometimes it comes up in like kilograms and centimeters, but you can switch it to feet and inches and things that we use, and it'll spit out a number. And these are the different categories. So if you're under 18.5, you're underweight. You're in this healthy weight right here between 18 and 25, essentially. So 25 to 30 is where we start calling somebody overweight. And again, everybody can do this in 2 seconds, figure out what you are. And then we have obese from 30 to 39, and then kind of severely obese over 40. So, and if you're thinking, gosh, it's just me, I'm the only one worrying about it. Well, guess what? I got my head up here because when I do my BMI, I usually come out in the 26 range, somewhere around that area. And I know you're all thinking, how could that be possible? You are just head to toe, just pure muscle. And first of all, thank you. I'm glad we're talking about this and just getting it out there. But no, the truth is that we all struggle with our weight, myself included. And if Steve was up here, he would say the same thing, that he's usually kind of 25, 26 in the overweight category. So all of us are trying to probably lose a few pounds. I will say, however, whenever I do this talk, we talk about weight management, there's always at least one person that comes up to me and says, I thought with weight management you're going to talk about I just can't gain weight. So there are those people out there, and I have to say, well, maybe next time we'll do that talk. But in my head, I'm like, oh, I wish I had that problem, But there are people that have it, the other side. But we're really going to be talking about the majority of us, which are on, the too heavy side. So again, why is my face up there? Just because I'm one of you. It's something that's usually on my mind. I do weigh myself. I really think about what I eat, exercise, all those kinds of things. But it's hard when you have type 1 diabetes. So the next kind of part of my talk is going to go through some of the reasons why it's hard to lose weight, and then some things that we can actually do about it. So why do I have the Backstreet Boys here? Well, if you can hear this picture, it is probably saying, "Tell me why." Anybody? No? So we want to know why. Why do we have problems with weight if we have type 1 diabetes? And if you don't like the Backstreet Boys 90 Pop reference, then look at this squirrel. Same thing. He just wants to know why. Why I have type 1 diabetes? Why do I have to struggle with my weight now? It doesn't seem fair. I'm supposed to be this healthy, skinny kid. I'm supposed to be Mr. Shredded guy doing this. I do this a lot. I don't lose weight. I don't know what's going on. So here's some of the reasons. So first of all, with diets or any kind of approach we have to food, it can be easy to be derailed. So I can't tell you the number of times I've been, okay, literally diet starts Monday. I'm going to do this. I'm going to change my, eating habits, whatever. What happens at 2 a.m.? I get low. Out comes the peanut butter, the cheese, everything. And it's just I just blew all the work I did for that day or that week. And it can be so frustrating. And it can easily kind of get you off track. So that happens to a lot of us. Or, I'll talk about later, you get, low and you're just drinking sodas and these calories that you don't necessarily want to drink. So diets and kind of maintaining them are hard in general, but then you throw around having to manage insulin and highs and lows, it can make it extra difficult. So this is the woe is me part of the talk. So we're going to go through again the kind of the bad things. So diet starts tomorrow. Now what about exercise? So it says fitness instructor, have you done a marathon? You're like on Netflix. So Baby Yoda is always a hit, right? What does this have to do with Baby Yoda? I don't know, but he's cute and he's thinking Netflix. It's a good meme. So exercise can be hard too, right? So again, for most people, it's difficult to get motivated to go to the gym, do like whatever. But then you throw on like, your blood sugars are low or whatever it might be. I can't tell you like, at least several times I've driven to the gym, got all my clothes on, I'm ready, I'm low, I'm sitting there in the parking lot, drinking a soda, and I'm like, I'm just gonna go home. And I've done that several times. Or you're at the gym and you're on a bike or a treadmill or something, and I've done this before, literally drinking a Coke. And one, you're mad at yourself. First, you're low, you don't feel good. Second, you're mad at yourself that you're like burning the calories that you're actively like putting in your body. And then it's probably a warm Coke, so that's 3 why you're mad. And then 4, people are looking at you weird, right? Who drinks a Coke like in the gym? So exercise can be difficult, and again, I'll come back to how to do this, but the time of day of exercise matters. Sometimes it can make you go low. Sometimes you can get the high spike after you exercise. It's just every time you exercise, it can be different. It's one of the most difficult and challenging aspects, I think, of type 1 diabetes is managing blood sugars around exercise, so it can just be another impediment. Overall, of course, exercise is good for us. It helps us lose weight and cardiovascular health, and the list goes on, sleep, etc. But it can be hard. All right, so that's issue number 2. Diets are hard, exercise is hard. And of course, what is this? Low blood sugars, right? And this happens to all of us. Most type 1s on average get about 2 low blood sugar episodes a week, and that's kind of on average. Some of us more, some of us less. Some days, weeks are better than others. I follow Steve and he follows me with his blood sugars, and I get alerted when he's less than 55. And so, he always gives me a hard time if I don't call him right away. Like, you don't love me, like, you didn't call me. So I actually track his location too, so I can see where he is. And I think we talked about this, Steve. So like about a month ago, he was on a safari in Africa, and I was getting this alert notification that he was low, and it was like 1 a.m. his time in Africa. And so I'm like, well, where's Steve? And I pull out my phone and like zoom in on like Africa, and I can like see that he's at this resort. And I'm calling him, he's not answering. I'm calling his girlfriend's not answering. I'm like, well, I guess I got to call this like Tanzania hotel, like because I can like see where he is. And I call this hotel, but then thankfully right when I did that, Steve got back to me that he was okay. So anyways, point of the story is I love you, Steve. I'm glad you're here and your blood sugar's worked out. Follow people. This is something that we probably don't do enough. Have somebody follow your blood sugars, not because they're nosy or whatever, but just so that they know when you're low. Anyways, I got way off track. The point about low blood sugars as it goes to weight is this, right? One of the greatest movies ever, Elf. What are the like 4 food groups? I don't know, syrup, candy, syrup, and syrup. But this is an actual picture of me last night, when I got home from the bar, late. But there's nothing worse. Like, it doesn't matter, like, when your blood sugar goes low, especially at night, because that's usually when you let it go kind of a little too long. It doesn't matter what you tell yourself, like, oh, just have a little juice and go to bed. Like, if you get out of bed, that fridge is gone. Like, it's just gone. Once you start eating, you cannot stop. And I've done this a million times, and I tell myself, oh, this is a bad no. I really need like this second bowl of cereal to like, bring me up. And then of course you go to 400 and things like that. But as far as, losing weight, could you imagine something worse than eating like 2,000 calories at 2 a.m.? I mean, that's just like, that's a problem. So we're going to talk about ways to maybe deal with this. So with all this news, you might be feeling like the deck is stacked against you, right? This guy was actually in a tragic car-related accident here. I don't know if you can see him. This giant deck fell on him and killed him. But so if you're feeling like the deck is stacked against you, well, guess what? There's hope. I'm going to go through some of these and give you some tips on how we can get shredded, okay? So right now you're saying, please God, give me the answer. Billy Madison, great movie. I'll die on that hill. Okay, so what about diet starts tomorrow? So what can we do? Well, there's diets and diabetes are weird. So first of all, there is no diabetes diet. Like if people always come in, what should I be eating? It depends. And I'm going to talk about some options. But also there's all these like antiquated things that have stuck around for a long time. So when I was diagnosed, I was on regular and NPH, and I had to take it, before dinner. and you had to take like a bedtime snack before you went to bed, otherwise, the NPH would make you go low. So this idea of like, I have to eat and I have to have a bedtime snack is this kind of persisted. You just ask people that don't really know anything about diabetes, don't you have to eat certain times, things like that. We don't really have to do that anymore. If you're on a good like basal dose of Lantus or a basal insulin, you shouldn't have to eat. Same thing if you're on a good pump. You should be able to not eat and not have your blood sugars go too low or too high. And once we know that, that kind of frees it up in terms of what diets we can actually do. So I have this color wheel that just says all options are available to you, which is true. If you want to do low carb, do it. It's helpful. I have some slides on that. If you want to do intermittent fasting, you can do it. That's something that I get asked a lot. Oh, I can't fast, right? Absolutely you can. If that's a diet that you think might work for you, you can do it. You can even do keto. So all these things that other people are trying, at least know that they're available to you so you don't feel so confined. And of course, diets are difficult. People fall off the wagon with them, etc. But finding one that you can kind of stick to is a good place to start. And I think I have some slides of my kind of approaches to diet. So when I was making this talk, I was looking through our podcasts, and I have to say objectively, I love our podcasts. Yes, I happen to do many of them, but they're just like a different venue, different way of talking about things that we can get into a little bit deeper on some of these topics. And we've done a couple, so we actually did one on intermittent fasting with one of our coworkers at UCSD, which is actually, I wasn't on this one, and this is our #1 listened to podcast, so yay. This is another one. Is there really such thing as a diabetes diet? We actually did this with our friend Adriana, who used to work with us as a dietitian at UCSD, now actually works for Insulet that makes Omnipods, so she's here been boothing. And then when I was making this talk, I literally saw that we did a podcast on weight management for type 1 diabetes, and I was like, I should listen to that. So that's why it's being played right now. So Steve and I talking about kind of all these things. So there's more information on these diets, especially on these podcasts, that are really, really good. So if you want to learn more about how can I intermittent fast, how do I do it? The most common one is where people simply stop eating from 8 p.m. to noon the next day. And that might appeal to you because it's not, eat this, don't eat that, weigh this, whatever. It's just, okay, at 8 p.m. I have to, stop eating and try not to eat till the next day. That's one thing that people can try to do. There's other ways to do that. So listen to those podcasts if you want information. For me, you're asking, how do I look this way? What's my diet plan? I eat what I call low carb-ish. And, I've done a kind of low carb for such a long time that I wouldn't even call it a diet anymore. It's more just kind of my general approach to food. And not even so much because of my weight, it's just when you eat carbs, your blood sugars go crazy. And trust me, I am all for eating carbs. Guess what? Carbs are delicious. But, when you eat a whole lot of them, it can be difficult. So if you give me, and it's also hard to carb count when you eat a lot more carbs. So you give me one slice of bread, I could probably tell you how many carbs that is within reason. You give me a big old bowl of pasta, I have no idea. So it makes it much harder to bolus for it, and your blood sugars always go high. So low carb doesn't have to mean low delicious. So I love In-N-Out. We have In-N-Out here. It's amazing. So you can get things like protein style, where they just kind of lettuce wrap the burgers, which is still good, or maybe just taking off one top of the bun, something like that, just to cut down on the carbs. I love bacon and eggs, and people say, what about your cholesterol? Eggs have gotten a really bad rap. They're actually, you can eat eggs, and if your cholesterol is high, take something for cholesterol and eat your eggs. That's what I do. Bacon, eggs, I love this. All kinds of meat and veggies. A low carb diet doesn't have to be super restricted. I have a love-hate relationship with cauliflower rice. But let's be honest, rice is just a delivery mechanism for whatever sauce you're putting on it anyways. So you just kind of douse it with soy sauce or whatever you want, and then you're good to go. Guess what else is low carb? Bourbon! and other various alcohols. So, zero carbs. So you can, hard alcohol with, mixers, like whatever, is low carb. So there's ways that you can do this. And I'm not preaching this is the diet you have to do. But I have found, for me, ways to still eat things that I enjoy. And trust me, I go hog wild on pizza and things like, But in general, not eating the fries or less fries, those kinds of things. For me, it's just easier because I'm not really good at counting carbs. I don't even count carbs. I said it. I don't count carbs. But I know what a carb is, and I'm pretty good at minimizing them, and then I can bolus for the carbs that I am eating. All right. So the thing about all of these things, weight loss in diets and exercise, is setting goals. And the most important thing about the weight loss is that people are always way too overambitious. That look, we wake up on Monday morning, we feel like, gosh, I went crazy this weekend, drank too much, ate too much, slept too much, whatever. I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to lose 10 pounds by Friday. And guess what? It doesn't happen. Or I have a wedding I want to go to in 2 months from now, and I want to lose 10 pounds. A very reasonable goal is half a pound a week. Okay? A very aggressive goal is 1 pound a week. So if you kind of map that out, if I need to lose 10 pounds, that might take you 10 to 20 weeks. So, keeping that in mind, and so when you, don't lose 10 pounds by Friday, you don't just give up. And then you can weigh yourself, and there's different ways of doing this. People generally will weigh themselves every day or a couple of times a week, first thing in the morning. Get one of those scales that you can track your weight. I've actually found those really helpful, not necessarily for what I was yesterday, but 2 years ago. Especially if I'm feeling really heavy, and I'm like, oh, well, 2 years ago I was a little fatter, so I must be doing good now. These goals are actually important. And I would say even writing them down, because they can become kind of nebulous. What weight are you trying to get to? How quickly do you want to do it? What are some interventions that you're going to start? And a lot of people say, I'm just going to not eat ice cream. You got to do something positive too. I'm going to start this approach. I'm going to actually go to the store and buy these things, whatever it is. But actually writing these goals down. So back to exercise. So exercise can be difficult, like I said. And what is the actual recommendation when it comes to exercise? So it's actually 30 minutes of physical activity 5 days a week. Now, exercise can be daunting, because I know in this group we have literally people that run marathons and people that just don't exercise. And so for the people that are, just don't exercise, how do I get into it? And I don't want to join a gym. I don't want to put on spandex. I don't want to do all that. So 30 minutes of activity can literally be walking around the block, or something that you actually enjoy, but 30 minutes of sustained activity 5 days a week. And then as you find that you're doing it, it can become kind of a habit. Maybe you do join a gym or do a cycle studio or whatever. I have found that the key to working out and having a good time with it is having a good playlist. And you guys are probably wondering what my favorite song is on my playlist, and it's actually just one song on repeat. And if you're wondering what it is, can you hit me with it, Eric? Thanks. We planned that. That was a good little bit, but anyways. So the point is, you're doing something that you love. So here's a picture of Steve and I. This is one of my favorite videos that we did. We did an exercise challenge where he walked at an incline, a pretty good incline, for 45 minutes, and I rode on a Peloton for 45 minutes. And the whole point was talking about how different exercises can affect you differently. Sustained walking will usually bring your blood sugars down. If you do something more high intense, like aerobic, like Peloton, it can raise your blood sugars. Also, different things can happen at different days. So we talked exactly about how to prepare for exercise, how what you might eat, to avoid a low, what to do during exercise, and then how to maybe recover so your blood sugars don't, spike after a meal. So this is a great video to watch. And I will say people love this video because Steve and I just did an awful job. We set it up with all these rules and things like that. And I think he went low and I went high. So the whole point is that even when you know all the information and do things as best you can, you still can get these these speed bumps. But at least knowing what to expect. So for me, I used to run a lot. And when I would stop running, when I get home, my blood sugar would go to 300. And I was just like, what is that about? And it used to bother me so much, and then I would take an injection and go low. But it's just your adrenaline gets pumping. So something like a cool down, like 10 minutes after you're running, just walking for 10, 15 minutes, or on the Peloton, just spinning your legs for another 10 minutes can really help. So lots of little tips like that, just so that you can try to not make diabetes a deterrent to exercise, can be really helpful. And then this video ended with me doing a cannonball in Steve's pool, which somehow made it into the video, which was fantastic. So this is a good one. Now, if you guys have not seen the website or don't know how to see these videos, please check it out because it's tcoid.org. And up here, if you just click watch, there's this thing that says the video vault. And literally every single video that we've ever done is in here, again, completely for free. And it's organized by all these different categories, and you can click on exercise that you can watch. And you can see our exercise challenge. We have an exercise physiologist, Mike Riddell, who's actually spoken under one conference, who has type 1, talking about exercise, things like that. So we have a lot of fun videos that we did. And one of the nutrition ones that was fun that we did is that Steve and I actually went to a supermarket and put GoPros on the carts. So you could film us, go around, and we actually went and bought things that we would normally eat. And then we went through and kind of would talk about it. And we had our dietitian later watch the video, kind of like this floating, angel in the corner. And she could pause it and be like, okay, that was a bad choice by Jeremy or a good choice by Steve. We had our egg debate, which is still unresolved. So it's a fun video where we actually talk about, very practically, things that we actually buy, what we would make, what we like to eat, all those kinds of things. So this is a fantastic resource. And then if you click listen, you can also get to the podcast. It's actually, super easy to do. All right, so then hopefully you get here, right? After you're done, working out, reward yourself. You look good. A little flex in the mirror, whatever. What about low blood sugars? How can we prevent this? Well, again, first of all, a whole different talk on how to prevent low blood sugars. This is specifically about what Steve calls the werewolf syndrome, where you wake up in the middle of the night and you go crazy and start eating everything. Well, this next picture, so here's what we're trying to avoid, right? This next picture, don't get too excited, is a picture of me in bed and my approach to how I avoid low blood sugars. So here it is. Here's me sleeping. And I'm all tucked in, and I'm enjoying myself. And I got my picture of Steve right here. And I sleep with a couple apple juices by my bed, and usually just one. And the reason I do that is because I have learned that if I sit in bed and just drink my apple juice, my low blood sugar will go away. It'll treat the low blood sugar. I don't need to get out of bed. So I always have that right by my bed, because if I do get out of bed, like I said, it's over. So this is effective, I would say, 80% of the time. But then the other 20%, it's just no, this is a bad one. Even though it's probably not, I'm just really hungry. So this is actually an effective, simple thing to do. Whether it's apple juice, Skittles, whatever you want to have by your bed, is great. And I do like that, I keep them by my bed so they're a little warm, meaning that I have no desire to drink them otherwise. It's just okay, I'm gonna drink my own, my warm apple juice, whatever. And then yeah, I got my good picture of Steve, and I just kind of look at him while I drink it, and then I feel better. All right, what about weight loss medications? Well, we mentioned these earlier. So Ozempic and Wegovy. So I'm going to do a little bit more of a deep dive on this. So this is the same medication. It's called semaglutide, but they had to call it different trade names, Ozempic versus Wegovy, for different indications. Namely, Ozempic is for people with type 2 diabetes, and Wegovy is for people for obesity. So where do type 1s fit in that? Well, first of all, we know that these medications can help people with type 1 diabetes improve their blood sugars, lose weight, etc. The issue is it's not covered by insurance, so it can be very difficult to get them covered. However, if your doctor sometimes can say that you have insulin resistance or that there's a weight issue, sometimes they will actually get filled. I have a lot of type 1s that are actually on this. But if you are actually obese, if your BMI is over 30, then regardless if you have diabetes, you can actually get on this medication. So right now, there's a shortage of both of these medications because they're literally flying off the chart. But it's something for you guys to be aware about. If it's something of interest to you, like weight loss is something that you're really trying to do, This is something that depending on how much your provider will kind of fight for you, you can get on these medications, use them safely, and I would say they have the nice almost side effect, making your blood sugars better. You'll use less insulin. The way they work is that you just don't eat as much. So people can lose massive amounts of weight on these drugs. Again, the frustration right now for type 1s is that they're not approved, which just means they haven't done the studies specifically in type 1s. And the companies, like, to be honest, they don't really need to because they're already flying off the shelves, with weight and type 2 diabetes and things like that. But these drugs can be super effective. What about bariatric surgery? Honestly, something I would reserve kind of for end of the line, like end of the road. If you tried everything else, still trying to lose massive amounts of weight. People with type 1 diabetes can get bariatric surgery, but there can be more issues with hypoglycemia. It is a big surgery. So it was not something that I would actually say, like, everybody should go out and get bariatric surgery. People definitely can regain the weight. To be honest, I don't recommend it for people, especially now that we're using more of these medications. And I think it is going to be easier to get these for people that, have weight issues and potentially just for type 1 diabetes. So I think my last slide is sometimes people ask, like, what about these cosmetic things? Cool sculpting and these, like, lasers and liposuction and things like that. Is that going to affect my insulin absorption, et cetera? So you can do these cosmetic procedures. I mean, keep in mind that these are cosmetic and there's nothing wrong about that. But those are available, and if that's, you just want to lose a little area, here or there, like there's nothing wrong with that. So sometimes people say, again, yeah, this is going to affect my pump, et cetera. So I think that's pretty much it. I hope that you guys enjoyed my weight loss talk, and I'm going to keep this on for a little bit longer, we'll be around for questions at the end. But I think actually next is going to be me, right? I'm still doing this. Okay, so I'm staying right here. Thank you, everybody. Oh, I need to get my computer.
Okay.
Okay.
Jeremy's going to grab his computer. We can have all the folks come on up. Great talk, Jeremy. You look like you work out every day, but Eric, don't play that music anymore. I should say that we have the little question boxes here because tomorrow, right before we get to the final session with Jeremy and myself, we're going to answer all the questions that you guys put in this box throughout the rest of the conference. Also, after this session is over, Michelle Day, our meeting planner, been with TCOID 20 years, has been working feverishly on the weather report and talking to the hotel about discounted rooms if folks need to stay another night, and we'll be able to answer those questions, but once we finish. Jeremy went to grab his laptop, and I can start with some of the intros. Aaron Kowalski, raise your hand, Aaron. Aaron, I can get this part over with quickly. They've all been living with type 1 diabetes. So to think about people that developed type 1 and then went in the field. And Aaron is the top guy, the chief medical and chief executive officer of the JDRF. And how long have you been there, Aaron?
19 years.
19 years. So he has appropriately gone up the ranks, and I have a lot of respect for JDRF for getting Aaron and promoting him, and he's just a great face of the organization, mainly because he puts it up on Facebook all the time when he's running. Leslie Island, she is a professor in Omaha, Nebraska. She's got type 1, she's got 2 kids. She's been in a lot of our video programs, and her claim to fame, at least for a while, has been remote learning and video visits during COVID. But she's tired of talking about that. We're going to skip it on this. And then Justin Gregory, he's just an amazing guy. He's got 4 kids, was an Air Force fighter pilot, got type 1, and now he's a pediatric endocrinologist and went into some heavy-duty research area, shares a lot of that with Jeremy. So Jeremy, take it away.
All right. Well, I am back. Thanks to my panelists for joining me. And I think the other important part of your introduction is that... We good? Oh, I think Steve walked by that speaker. But you guys are all on the same Peloton team together, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? I mean, in regards to my weight loss talk.
I'll start this story. So during the pandemic, my wife, who's a big marathon runner, had an injury, and she's like, I got to find something to do. And a neighbor down the street was putting their Peloton up for sale. And no kidding, just wheeled it down the street to our house. And she started riding it. And I used to be a serious road cyclist, and I kind of rolled my eyes at the idea of Peloton. I thought it was basically glorified aerobics. And so, I just kind of rolled my eyes and sat and felt sorry for myself for the first few months of the pandemic. But then I found out that my two friends here were on, and I'll let them jump in, but long story short, I got addicted to it because every Wednesday morning, Leslie and I, hey, what are you doing tomorrow morning? And during the pandemic, I had this little clip where I could put my phone and I just text, and that was about as much socialization as I did for a while, and that was a lifeline for me. So, yeah.
It's been almost 3 years that we've been pretty consistently riding together.
Peloton together.
From Omaha and Nashville. Yeah.
All right, well, we got a lot to talk through. Like, this is vaguely called research and kind of breakthroughs in type 1 diabetes. So a lot of different areas. So we're going to cover, these broad themes that Steve and I kind of laid out in the beginning, but technology, potentially other medications besides insulin, that's another category. New immunotherapies, medications for type 1 diabetes, immune-related, and then what I'll call cellular replacement, stem cells or beta cell replacement, all those kind of categories. So I think, just starting with technology and a little bit of the here and now, we can talk about, CGM sensors that you guys are using, the new things on the block, G7, experiences with like Libre, like anything that you guys want to talk about in that regard. I think there's probably a lot of questions about the G7 and that rollout. I don't know if anybody wants to start there, maybe.
So I have quite a bit of experience with the G7, primarily in my type 2 patients and a few of my type 1s on multiple daily injections, but most of my patients are just anxiously awaiting their hybrid closed loop system, either with the Omnipod 5 or Control-IQ, to become amenable with the G7. And so I'm hopeful. I think there's been some delays, but it seems like that actually may happen in the next few months.
Yeah,
Into the calendar year.
It's been my experience too that it's obviously a good system. It's that's a 30-minute warm up instead of 2 hours. And again, here we are now kind of complaining about the 2 hours, but that 30 minutes actually is a nice change. And then having everything in one device, like the sensor and the transmitter, so you don't have the second prescription. You're always losing one or the other, so that's nice. And it's definitely smaller, but it doesn't work with any of the pumps yet, with the Omnipod and the Control-IQ, so we're kind of waiting for that.
Well, one question I get a lot in clinic, I don't think people understand, well, why do these people that are doing multiple daily injections get to have it and not people with pumps? And the reason is that anytime you have a new addition to, say, an insulin pump that has to be approved by the FDA, and you make a significant change to it, you need to show that it's safe and efficacious, and there's a process to doing that. So it's one thing to say, hey, this new CGM is not changing Lantus or Humalog, but it does when you're using a new device to control, say, automated insulin delivery. And so I've tried to explain that to my patients. Hey, it's coming, probably. It's just going to take a few months to get there.
Jeremy, I'll just add one thing here from our perspective at JDRF. A big focus of ours over the years has been automated insulin delivery, and I'm proud that each one of these pumps has technology that we funded in them. But the thing that makes me crazy right now is this problem of integration of technology. So folks who raise their hand with Loop, JDRF actually funded a not-for-profit company called Tidepool to bring Loop through the FDA. And it's approved. It's approved, but we can't use it. And you would say, well, why is that? And I think it's incredibly short-sighted. I know the company people are here, and I've said this directly to them, that the companies are trying to control like the whole kit and caboodle versus like focusing on what they do best. And I'm a big believer that more options for people are better, and picking which sensor, which pump, and then ultimately which algorithm is best is where we need to be. So I think what's going to happen in the future, and it'll be very interesting when we come back next year or in 2 years, when some of these companies just start to say, we're going to work with apps on the cell phone like Loop. Because ultimately that, I always joke that my wife drives a 2017 Volvo and I drive a 2021 Chevy Bolt, and her mapping system is still Volvo's. Oh. And it looks like Pac-Man from 1980. And I use, of course, I have Waze, I have Google Maps. The software is different than the hardware. And I think what's got to happen here quickly is you got to start plugging and playing with these devices. And that's a big focus of ours. And I think somebody's going to start to do it, and everybody's going to have to get on board there.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's improved that was previously a barrier for us is after it gets FDA approved, getting the payers to then start covering it. But that's really sped up. I think the G7 was approved by the FDA in end of December, and CMS already approved it in March, which is a much faster process than it used to be. So, and I think a lot of private insurers have been covering the G7 for months and months now. So I'm encouraged at that, increase in speed.
I just, it's kind of on the same topic, but I would say one kind of silver lining of COVID is it forced all these doctors' offices, ours included at UCSD, to start actually using kind of telehealth care, and particularly for people with diabetes, finally figuring out how to actually download people's CGMs remotely so that we can see that information when we see people remotely. But also just now, before I go see a patient, their CGM data is all there, their pump data is all there. And before COVID, it was do you still have the right wires? And if you don't have it, you couldn't download it. So it's been super helpful to see people's information. And it's just, I don't know how to practice diabetes care, type 1 care without that CGM information. Because if you don't have that, then it's you got 3 finger sticks from the last month or something. So that's been a huge benefit of having that data, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that also empowers people that relied on patients figuring it out and downloading those apps and getting connected, because before they were very reliant on their clinicians and the clinics. And so it's nice to see, people are getting the app and then they're starting to look at their data, which they weren't before. So it's an additional benefit.
Yeah.
Just the one last thing, because now I love these topics. They're so interesting. What we could be doing better, because at least for us at JDRF, there's kind of 2 big things that we're trying to do: is get smaller and interoperable, and then remove meal boluses. Those are the big things for us. But everybody's talking about AI. Bill, you put up the ChatGPT and all this machine learning stuff. It makes me bananas right now that we don't use the data that we have in these pumps to dial in basal rates, correction factors, and insulin to carb ratios. Every one of these math people who build these algorithms can do this with your data with 2 weeks of data. Yet the pumps aren't doing it yet. It makes me absolutely nuts. And I think that's another huge opportunity, is to not only get us, the people with diabetes, to get better data, but also the physicians. When you come into the office, hey, these basal rates aren't right. It's not fuzzy eyeballing it. It's computers learning it and telling you what it should be. And it's completely possible, but we're not doing it yet.
Well, we agree. So, we're talking about these systems, and again, hopefully everybody's knows what they are. It's been available to them. We talked about the Omnipod 5, fantastic system, Tandem Control IQ. Also amazing. I know people on this panel are on these systems. And then the new kid is the iLet. And so have you guys had any clinical experience yet using it, or things that you want to share with the group?
We haven't yet. And I think some of that's they're just expanding. They're a growing company. They're moving into new parts of the country where they'll have people to support it. So we haven't gotten there yet in Nashville, but other parts of the country have.
Yeah, I think it's still limited to centers that did their clinical trials. So I know for Nebraska and Iowa, we don't have a rep for our region yet. I think they may, hopefully the next month or so, virtually train our pump trainers. And so I'm hopeful that my patients could get it, hopefully by the end of the calendar year.
Yeah, so, we actually were one of the centers here at UCSD, and our experiences with it, which I think was similar to a lot of the investigators, was that the pump really, it works well, but we all kind of believed when we started it that the people that were going to do the best with the system were going to be people that were already on pumps. They knew how to use pumps and change infusion sets and things like that. But what we actually found is the people that did the best were people typically actually on injections, and for lack of a better word, people that just didn't want to deal with their diabetes. And that the pump could kind of do good enough without them really having to interact with it. People that were already on Tandem Control-IQ, because I don't think Omnipod 5 was available when we were doing this, they didn't like it as much because you couldn't like interact with it as much. They, like, their control might actually not have been as good, which was interesting to us. So it's not to say that, like, you know, like you shouldn't try it if you're already on one of these systems, but it might have a niche, you know, in, you know, rural areas, for example, where because one of the benefits of this pump, it's a lot easier to get people started on it. You don't have to enter carb ratios and things like that. To just make these pumps more accessible, you know, use this pump. If you're on shots, we can get your A1C down into the 7 range without you having to do much. So it's an interesting addition to the market. And right now it's with insulin only, and the plan was always to add glucagon to it. So it's, you know, a dual hormone pump. And that remains to be seen if that'll come to fruition, but just kind of another interesting option that literally just popped up.
I think a recent development is that these control algorithms are getting better at recognizing, without you telling it, hey, I'm eating, that you're switching into meal absorption mode, right? Like it said, okay, even though you didn't tell me you just had breakfast, your glucose looks like you just had breakfast. And what's happening there is it modulates the control algorithm to say, I'm not going to be in sort of overnight mode, I'm going to be in aggressive mode, even if you didn't tell me. And that's you know, been a big component of Medtronic coming out with the 780. It's clearly a big part of Beta Bionics. And so I think that's probably what we're going to see in the next 2 or 3 years is all of these algorithms are going to switch to be able to say, yeah, would it be good to bolus before? That's going to, until insulin's really, really fast, it's probably going to be the case. But do you pay as big of a price for not bolusing before as you used to, say, 2 or 3 years ago? I think the difference is going to get slim. I think that's what we're about to see.
So one of the cool things about this pump, and I think that we're moving this direction, is that when you do eat and you want to tell what you're eating, you just say, I'm eating a typical amount for this time of day, a little bit more than usual or a little bit less. So moving away from, I just admitted to all of you I don't count carbs, and a lot of us don't. But, you know, and certainly people without diabetes don't count carbs. It's just not something that we do. But we can all tell something that we're eating, and we know what like a typical amount is, or a little bit more, a little bit less. So moving to more kind of qualitative eating rather than this kind of like carb counting, and then, you know, what did you do wrong if you didn't count your carbs right? So I also just wanted to tell everybody that I've been on all these systems, and right now I'm actually on shots, and I've been doing that for like, you know, the last couple months, actually taking basal insulin and then doing like inhaled insulin with meals. And so just saying again that there's no wrong way to do this. With all this technology evolving, it's fantastic. But if you want to take a pump break, you certainly can. And actually there's some value in that. Learning how to convert back and forth from a pump, because I can't tell you the patients that I've had that their pump's broken and they're just like, they don't know what to do with their diabetes. So all these options are available. The technology is going to keep getting better. I will get back on a pump, but, you know, just trying the shots right now and whatever works for you guys.
Yeah, I'll say, Jeremy, I think a lot of people don't appreciate that you can add stuff on top of your pump. Like, I always have a Frez on me. You know, I'm on Control-IQ, always have a Frez on me. When I was flying out here yesterday, I got a 350 blood sugar for like no apparent reason. Could not bolus that thing down. Freza, right back to, you know, 140. And, you know, that's where I think the removal of the bolus may be with some of these things like semaglutide, or, you know, using an Afrezza for a bolus instead of the bolus feature on the pump. And most people just don't think it. They're like, wait, you do both? And I'm like, yeah, my doctor split up the prescription. I get, you know, liquid insulin and I get inhaled insulin. It's just another tool in the toolbox.
Mm-hmm. I do the same.
Yeah.
One thing I would say about the iLet is that, yeah, I think there's huge value for this for people who are managed by a primary care provider, because I think this is like just such a low ask on the clinician. But I think there's a lot of people that struggle with health literacy and numeracy. Diabetes has, you know, there's so many numbers and ratios, and this could be a great system. But I also think there are people on current systems like Omnipod 5 and Control-IQ that we think they're doing well from a metrics perspective, but really have a high degree of diabetes distress and are looking for the ability just to offload something onto a system. I had a patient in clinic just a few days ago, just this past week, saying, you know what I think my biggest problem is with Control-IQ? I think it's me. I'm the problem because I think I know more than the algorithm, and I'm like, no, I need way more than that, or I need less than that, and then it comes back to bite me a few hours later. And I think if I just remove myself from the equation, I think things would go a lot more smoothly. And I think what she was hearing me say about this new system, she was really interested.
At first I thought you said it was mean. I was like, oh, I want to hear about this mean talk. So I think, we'll kind of leave technology now, but like just listening, you can just hear how like rapidly this is changing. And again, it wasn't that long ago that we didn't have CGM. Another thing that's happening is it's just easier for people to get insurance and things like that. When I first started talking about CGM, I don't know, 10 plus years, whatever, at TCOID, at talks like this, people were just mad, like yelling at me. I was talking about like the benefits of CGM, and I got one, isn't this great? And they couldn't get it, and they were just angry. Especially went to Hawaii, and Hawaii was way behind with their insurance plan there, and people just couldn't get it. So thankfully, that's becoming much less of an issue, and now actually people with type 2 are kind of like being able to get onto it. So it's all changing. So technology's great, it's happening. So next topic, which is one that I'm very passionate about, I know Justin is too, is this idea of other medications for people with type 1 to control blood sugars, let's say. So Justin, maybe just start like with why you think this is even worthwhile. Because I think that the kind of mantra has always been type 1s, you don't make insulin, so you just give them insulin and that takes care of everything.
Yeah, I think some of that's a legacy of probably the most important study that's been done in my lifetime, which was the diabetes complications and control trial. And that, so you might have even been participants in that study. They reported in 1993 that if you aggressively try to control glucose, if you try to get glucose down, you're going to drastically improve the rates of a lot of the complications of type 1 diabetes. And I think a legacy of that was, well, if you can fix high blood sugar, you're done. There's nothing more to do. And I think sort of the generation that came up in that era, that's been their focus, is how do we get A1C down? But there's problems with just using insulin as the only therapy. And one has to do with the fact that our bodies don't put insulin into the fat tissue first. Our bodies secrete insulin, and the first place that insulin goes is to the liver. And there's a reason, we'll talk about this later today, there's a reason why it's designed that way, to go to the liver first. You don't want to have too much insulin going around and hitting muscle. There's some consequences to that. A lot of the drugs that are being developed that are so beneficial in type 2 diabetes probably have some very real benefits in type 1, but because I think so much of the US market is type 2, there's not a lot of the same market incentives to develop those drugs and to test them for efficacy in type 1. And that's been a big concern of both of ours. So that's why I think we're in the situation we are, and part of what I think you and I both want to do in our research is try to say, hey, can we derive some of the benefits of adding these drugs onto insulin therapy for not just reducing high blood sugar, but things like glucose variability, weight gain, insulin resistance, and other things.
Mm-hmm. So do you guys, Leslie or Justin, you use these in your practice? You prescribe GLP-1s, your type 1s, or?
I've been using a lot of GLP-1s, more so than SGLT2s, and people do really well.
And GLP-1s like Ozempic, sorry.
I usually try Ozempic, and I will code for diabetes with insulin resistance, which is not, which is true. Mm-hmm. And then so I'll drop sort of a two visit diagnosis and code the Ozempic for the insulin resistance. But then sometimes I'll try Wegovy or a drug specific for obesity, but for a lot of plans, weight loss drugs are a plan exclusion. And so I tend to try Ozempic first and hope that it slides through. Right. Otherwise, I try Wegovy.
And my experience with prescribing these for type 1s is sometimes it just goes through. I always do the insulin resistance thing also, because maybe somebody who's coding this on the other side just sees that and thinks type 2 and it goes through. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it gets denied and you can push back with the prior auth, and sometimes it's just like a hard no. And it's really hard to kind of tease out when that will happen, but you guys should be empowered to at least know about these medications and ask. Justin's doing a whole talk on these, and talking about the effects, the side effects, all of that. Because as I said, and I think in our opening talk, I'm tired of type 2s getting all the good stuff. And I think these drugs do work for type 1s, and we need to be using them more.
It's a little bit different of a dynamic in pediatrics, and the reason that I say that is because when you're, especially with adolescents, you're dealing at a really challenging time when adolescents are trying to take more and more of the responsibility of type 1 onto themselves, and a lot of times not doing that very successfully, and that's part of the promise, I think, of closed loop. But one of the challenges of saying, okay, to a teenager, hey, you've got to take your insulin, I'm going to give you one more thing to do. And so part of what we're starting to think about is how can you derive the benefit of these medicines without increasing what's already a burdensome condition to live with. And one of the things that I'm excited about is this idea of co-formulating some of these medicines to go with insulin. So you're not asking someone to take another medicine, you're co-formulating a medicine, say, that some of you may take, I take, called Simlin, which slows down how quickly glucose is absorbed. It pushes down glucagon, which is too high when you have type 1 diabetes and you eat a meal. So the idea there is can we manipulate this medicine that you're already taking by adding on different compounds that then would complement what a hybrid closed loop system or even a fully closed loop system is trying to do. So that's where I hope the market and the research heads in the next decade.
Yeah, and I think that will happen. So I do see a day where it's going to be, yes, let's adjust your insulin, and then every kind of visit will say, like, are there other medicines that we should, think about? So leaving that topic behind for now, and again, Justin's doing a breakout.
Can I just make one more comment? Yeah, from our perspective, we've been really funding a lot of work in this space to do a couple things. One is show that they work in type 1 people, but also to drive the coverage issues and also get the companies to get type 1 labels. It's interesting you mentioned the SGLTs. So for folks who don't know, there's kind of two, the GLPs we call them, that affect how your beta cells make insulin and glucagon and how you're hungry. The other ones just cause you to pee out extra sugar. So Steve showed his pee kit. It lowers what we call your renal threshold. The challenge with these drugs in type 1 people is this phenomenon called euglycemic DKA, where you get DKA at a normal blood sugar. And some people don't understand that it's not high blood sugar that causes DKA, it's low insulin that causes DKA. But the interesting thing that's happening here is we've been trying to get companies to focus on ketone sensing. And Abbott has announced that in their Libre, they're going to have a continuous ketone sensor. So that could really open up the door for the companies to get interested in type 1 because it reduced the risk of diabetic ketoacidosis with a normal blood sugar. And for us, from a research perspective, one of the biggest, we talk about the metabolic, the A1C benefit, but the complications reducing benefits of these drugs are very, very stunning. Reduced progression to end-stage renal disease, incredible cardiovascular benefits. So, for us to have another tool in the toolbox that could maybe help with your A1C, maybe help with your weight, but also reduce risk of complications progression is a big deal. And I can tell you, we're very focused on trying to keep the companies interested and get approvals for type 1 people. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to jump to this kind of broad topic of cell replacement. So you guys, this is always in the lay press. There was a New York Times article a while ago too, type 1 diabetes has been cured in this person. And so I think what this ends up happening is that patients will come to see me and they'll say things kind of like, I want some of those stem cells. It's like this vague concept of like stem cells are doing something good in diabetes and like I want them, but I don't know what's happening. So Aaron, maybe like break us down of what giving beta cells back to somebody looks like, different ways of doing that. Where are we at?
Yeah, I'm smiling because I remember the first time I did this conference, my title was Curing Type 1, and I had a lot of folks like this audience, and they're like, we hate you, like there'll never be a cure. So why, I'll just take a very quick for folks who haven't heard me give this spiel before, why did we think there was a cure right around the corner, and then what's going on right now? And the short version is, we've been able to cure type 1 diabetes for over 20 years with islet transplantation. Islet transplantation, somebody dies, they donate their organs to medicine, They harvest, in this case, pancreases. They chop them up. They take out what are called the islets. So those are the beta cells, but other cells as well. And they inject them into the person's a vein in their leg, and they end up settling in their liver, these cells. If you meet these people, they will tell you flat out they're cured. And I've met a number of them. I see Marjorie, who's been on our board, has met these folks. Their A1Cs are normalized. They don't take insulin. They had, many of them had severe hypoglycemia problems, and they have to take immunosuppressants to keep these islets going. But the average lifespan for these islets is over a decade. In fact, I was with the guy from Edmonton, James Shapiro, and he has patients 20 years off insulin. So you'd say, well, how are we still here talking about this? It's not scalable. It's not scalable. We have 1.4 million Americans with type 1 diabetes. We've done 5,000 islet transplants over the last 20 years. So this is where, it kind of builds up to this point. So, kind of two big problems that we've been trying to solve for. One is, can you make enough cells for everybody? 40,000 people diagnosed every year, so you got to have enough cells. And then do you need immunosuppressants? Can you get rid of them? Well, the punchline that everybody's been hearing in the news lately, and the team at Vertex is here, you can talk to them, is Vertex is doing a trial. They've released some data, and in each of the patients that are in this trial, the cells are making insulin, and they're stem cell-derived islets, not what we would call cadaveric islets. So this comes out of research that JDRF and others, NIH funded, going back to the late 90s at Harvard, where they took stem cells and grew them up to insulin-producing cells. And once you have a stem cell, you can make a gazillion of these. So the supply and demand issue then goes away, and this is where Vertex is. But the question is, will it work? Steve said we've cured 1 million mice. We've never cured people. You've probably seen the New York Times or Good Morning America, the first guy who was in this trial, a mailman from Boston with severe hypoglycemia problems. He's coming up on 2 years off insulin with a normal A1C. 5 points, low fives, 99.9% time in range, and everybody else is making insulin. So that just says then these cells can work, but they're on immunosuppressants. So this is the big focus of ours at JDRF is how broadly can you make this accessible and how do you take away the immunosuppression? Vertex just announced a week or two ago, you can ask them, that they are doing an encapsulated version of the cells. I know you worked on the ViaCyte, they acquired ViaCyte. It's probably a little harder, but that would not require immunosuppression. And then we're funding a lot of work on, for example, gene editing of these cells, so you can inject them without immunosuppressants. But maybe the last thing I'll say about this is, before questions, is it's really interesting to me, kind of this first step. I was with the team from Vertex here in San Diego at the ADA meeting, and I said, how many people out there with type 1 are on immunosuppressants already because they've had kidney failure? And it's about 10,000 people is what they estimate. The line of sight for a cure for these folks is here. I mean, if this trial pans out, you could see this, an immunosuppression-based curative cell therapy in the very near future, which is really amazing. And then, for me, and I think we have a number of legends, I'm proud to be a legend here, and folks who've lived with diabetes a long time, the big next question is, would you do it? So the folks at Vertex flat out asked me when I was in Boston, they said, would you do this? I said, I don't know. I got to think about that. And I went home and I said to my wife, I was just blown away by what they were doing. I mean, absolutely blown away. And I said to my wife, I think I would do it. And she goes, no, you don't want immunosuppressants. And I'm like, I kind of don't want diabetes. And, if you talk to these islet recipients, we actually have a whole pancreas recipient on our research committee right now. And I was sitting and asking about being on immunosuppressants and what it's like and what would you do? He goes, I would never, ever go back. So one of the big things for us at JDRF right now is actually advocating for broader access to these clinical trials. And ultimately, I firmly believe that any adult with type 1 diabetes in the United States, they and their doctor should have the decision to make that decision. Do I want to take immunosuppressants or not the FDA. Because right now they're limiting it. So it's an amazing time. And I know everybody's heard cures are around the corner. My brother was diagnosed in 77, so we've been doing this almost 50 years as well. But I firmly believe I'll take off my pump. I don't believe it's if, it's only a matter of when. And our goal is to make that happen as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, yeah, this is a super exciting area for sure. And the nice thing about, or a nice thing about beta cells is that they actually don't need to be in the pancreas. They just need to be able to kind of sense what the blood sugar is, secrete insulin. So as Aaron was saying, that opens the door for when we give people back the cells, we don't have to do a big surgery necessarily and put them in the pancreas. A lot of this work with what Aaron was calling encapsulation is, can we put these cells in a little device and maybe even implant them under the skin? And so the idea with these devices is that the blood sugar and the insulin can kind of freely be exchanged, but if the immune cells can't get in and kill the beta cells, then you might not need immunosuppression. So this is kind of like, the holy grail, I suppose, of, doing these types of, implants. I will say that this company Vertex did buy ViaCyte, and we were the first in the world to do one of these implants about 10 years ago now. We did it in one of a patient of mine. So, this takes time, but it actually is coming, and there's been some, major breakthroughs. So, I'm optimistic for this area for sure. So thank you for that, Aaron. So I think leaving that behind a little bit and talking specifically more about immunotherapies, and Justin, I know you're going to talk about this tomorrow, but I think I mentioned earlier that we have our first ever approved drug, an immunotherapy that does something in type 1 diabetes, actually delays the progression of onset of type 1. So maybe Justin, talk to us a little bit about what that is and how you see that evolving.
Well, it's been a long road. I think many of you have been participants in a group of studies called TrialNet, and an early goal of TrialNet was to identify people who are at increased risk of developing type 1 diabetes, and the way that you identify those individuals is by measuring antibodies in the body that are being directed against the part of the pancreas that makes insulin, the beta cells. And what TrialNet found a while ago is that if you have 2 of the 5 antibodies that they measured, provided you live long enough, you're going to eventually develop what we have begun to call stage 3 type 1 diabetes. And the thing to know about stage 3 type 1 diabetes is you're having symptoms and you need insulin. And so early on, they sort of really identified who is at risk of developing it. And through a number of studies for over the past 15 years or so, they had really a lot of disappointing trials where they would use these type of medicines that would modulate the immune system. And because, kind of like Aaron said, we can cure type 1 diabetes. We give someone a medicine called cyclosporin, and it would take the immune response away, but it puts that person at risk of all the complications of suppressing your immune system. That's not a good trade-off normally. So the idea is that can you develop an immune therapy that would say, hey, immune system, simmer down on the beta cells and let's just fight off other things. And so a study called TN10 was done in TrialNet, and it was the first to show that this new medicine called teplizumab, actually it's not a new medicine, it's a medicine that's been around that just never found a home. But they did this trial, and the top line is that in people who had gotten teplizumab, and now it's being marketed as Tzield, if you were on that medication, on average, from the time you got your teplizumab infusion until the time you developed stage 3 type 1 diabetes and needed insulin was about 4 to 5 years. And by comparison, the group that got placebo, they needed insulin in about 2 years. So what you're talking about is lengthening the amount of time to needing insulin by about 2 to 3 years on average. Some people do much better than that. Some people don't do well. And so we'll talk more about it tomorrow, but I think it heralds the new era. I call it the immunotherapy era of type 1 diabetes therapy. Because what I suspect is we'll find that it not only has some benefit in these individuals who have stage 2. These are people who are just beginning to have high blood sugar. but they don't have any symptoms yet because they still have insulin-producing beta cells in the pancreas. And I think we've established that there's benefit to those people. But what I'm hoping we'll find is that if you catch someone who's just developed what we call stage 3 type 1 diabetes, this is how many of us with type 1 diabetes learned that we had type 1 diabetes. We were peeing a lot or thirsty. There may be some benefit for those individuals. And so I think we as endocrinologists are not used to using those medicines, and we're going to need to get used to using them soon. And moreover, this is kind of the ground floor. I think that the future will show us that we'll be able to figure out for whom this particular therapy will most benefit, or for this other person, can we combine immunotherapies? Can we combine immunotherapy with metabolic therapy? And so I think over the next 10 to 20 years, the field's going to go in the direction of, one, can you delay the amount of time it takes to need insulin? And two, can you not only, once you do take insulin, can you preserve enough beta cells to lengthen the honeymoon period, this time where you don't need that much insulin, you just need a little bit, but the rest of your cells can help out. And so I think that it's an exciting time because of this recent development.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think, what this drug is doing is, again, reminding people that type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease, and it's about time we have something that actually targets the immune system. And type 1 diabetes in this regard is actually way behind some of these other autoimmune disorders, rheumatoid arthritis. I always make the joke, you can't turn on the TV without thinking you have mild to moderate, ulcerative colitis, or, because there's always some new drug. And now we finally have, something that can help with type 1s. So something that's been proven to delay the onset, and like Justin was saying, it's probably not very far off, that every type 1, when they're diagnosed, it's usually DKA, they could potentially get this drug to preserve the amount of insulin that they're producing, which is fantastic. And then the next studies will build on that, adding another medication, et cetera. So, and type 1 diabetes is tough. People ask, why does it take so long? Well, there's some reasons. I mean, one, we can't really look into the pancreas and see how many beta cells are there. It's very difficult. You can't, quantify it. You can't biopsy the pancreas. That's unlike our ulcerative colitis friends that can do, colonoscopies, which granted aren't fun, but you can still do biopsies and get information on what's going on there. It's a big black box in the pancreas. And the other thing is when your beta cells die, they generally just don't come back. So a lot of this death that's happening of the beta cells is happening when people don't even know it before they get type 1. So we just don't know this is happening. That's, again, unlike some of these other diseases where you kind of regrow your colon cells or whatever. So the deck's stacked against us a little bit. And so when people say, why does it take so long? That's some of the reasons. But here we are now literally in this year with our first approved drug, which is fantastic. Anything?
Yeah, no, I would just say for this group, the thing that's important to me is in immunotherapies is stomping out type 1 in the next generations. And most people say I'm the only person in my family or I'm the first person in my family. And why is that? Type 1 happens at a rate of about 4 in 1,000 people in the US. If you have type 1, our kids are as male and a female, it's about 5 in 100 risk for our kids, 3 in 100 for a female mom with type 1. The risk is higher, but it's not, as some of the psychologists would say, the glass half full is it's a 95 to 97% chance they won't get it, but it is 10 to 15 times elevated over background. So everybody in this room, your first degree relatives are 10 to 15 times more than their neighbors to get type 1. We have to stop this. Now the good news is, teplizumab to me is just the very tip of the iceberg. What we know is even these other immune therapies like for ulcerative colitis or rheumatoid arthritis, the genetics of type 1 are shared with all autoimmunity. Mm-hmm. Almost everybody in here will have other autoimmunity in their family because the genes are all focused on immune regulation that go haywire, that cause autoimmunity. And the thing that we're doing is we're actually piggybacking off a lot of this work right now. And I think, for example, one of our legendary, the person who developed teplizumab, Jeff Bluestone, he spun out of a company out of UCSF focused on type 1 diabetes, but other autoimmune diseases as well, because his technology, which is focused on regulatory T-cell work, is applicable at a higher level. So the thing that's really nice for me is, one is 3 years is just the beginning. Like, I firmly believe that as we really get these specific drugs coming along, we'll be able to very much delay the disease and preserve beta cell function. And actually, a lot of this work will help multiple autoimmune diseases because the mechanisms are almost the same.
The only thing I would add is that, this drug is so great, but right now it only applies for a very small number of people. And I think the door will really open if there becomes an indication for the newly diagnosed, because right now, as an adult endocrinologist, my main role in this is just to remind my patients, with all the other 20 things we have to talk about in our 20-minute visits, 2-3 times a year, that this drug exists, and they should consider pros and cons of getting their kids screened, of reminding their siblings that they could be screened, and offer them some resources. But if there becomes approval for the newly diagnosed, then I think that's really going to force even smaller clinical centers to get their ducks in a row and figure out how to figure out the logistics of this 14-day infusion. Because right now, I'm not seeing people really aggressively do that.
Well, I think, we're going to wrap up, but I hope you guys are at least left with an idea of there is a lot going on in all these different areas, and at a pace that has really picked up, from my perspective, in the last few years, to some real positive things. And like I joked before, I used to really not like doing these talks because it was like, oh, this trial didn't work, and this trial almost worked, but it didn't. And now we have some positive things, and stem cells, all this exciting stuff. So with that, we're going to do some announcements, but first to say thanks to our amazing panel for doing this.
Hi, everyone in our virtual audience. We're so excited that you could join us today virtually. We wish you could be here in person, but I think this is so cool that we have the option, if you do live far away, for you to be with us virtually today. So we are here to answer your questions live as they come in. So start throwing some questions in that chat box so that we can get your questions answered while you're here. I'm here with two of my favorite people, Dr. Steve Edelman and Dr. Schaefer Bader, who are here to answer your questions today. So let's get started.
All right. Well, thanks for all of you for joining. Unfortunately, we couldn't do the virtual for the rest of the day and Sunday, but it'll give you a good taste of what's happening. And don't forget the video vault on our website and our podcast.
All right. So I know in this morning's session, there was a lot of talk about kind of what's coming for the future of diabetes, and something that we're going to have some sessions on live kind of in person later today is sessions on automated insulin delivery systems. And this is probably, I think, maybe the most hot topic for type 1s these days. I mean, this is where all the technology is moving so quickly. So maybe while we're here, we'll start with that question, which is, can we break down the different types of automated insulin delivery systems or hybrid closed loop pumps, if you want to talk about it that way, and tell us your thoughts.
Well, I'll start off with the larger picture of what do these systems do, and to make it very simple, which it is simple when you think about it, it's a combination of a continuous glucose monitor feeding the frequent numbers to a pump that has a certain algorithm. It's all proprietary. If they told us how it worked, they'd have to, kill us. And the pump gives insulin automatically. So AID is automatic insulin delivery. And when your blood sugar shoots up or starts to shoot up, it'll increase your basal rate, maybe give you an auto bolus, and on the way down, it'll reduce your insulin delivery and even stop it if it thinks you're going to get to your lower limit, like 80, for example. And all these systems are a little bit different. Their form factor's different. You can have a patch pump, a regular tube pump. But I can say, before I let the others join in, is that, we're all endocrinologists. We see patients in clinic, and it has made our clinic visits incredibly different and better because these systems allow for better A1Cs, but more importantly, time and range. We'll talk about some metrics later on. Much lower hypoglycemia, and it really allows more time to cover other things during the visit. But these hybrid closed loop systems do require the settings are correct, and that it's not just slap it on with perfect control.
Except for one.
Yeah.
No, but and also in summary, I think the other important thing about these systems is that you can have great control of your diabetes without these systems. You can. But the big idea, and I think Leslie touched on this in the last session, is that you're getting great control by doing less, generally, right? In general. It's just you have something that kind of help you along the way.
Especially overnight.
And I think, Jeremy showed that CGM tracing earlier where overnight things looked really, really good. And you guys kind of pointed out that's that hybrid closed loop system doing the work. And, even looking back a few years when people were, deciding whether or not to go on insulin pump or stick with their, multiple daily injections. And before we had these hybrid closed loop systems, I think it was just really sort of like, each person to their own, like how do you want to get your insulin in your body? You're still having to figure out what your doses are or count carbs, and you still have to adjust your, your basals. And so, but with these new technologies, these algorithms are able to do things that, quite frankly, we can't. Our human brains cannot do it. We cannot do those calculations as well as these hybrid closed loop systems. So we are really seeing that they can do things that we can't. So those overnight control is amazing. The ability to detect changes in blood glucose control and give boluses as the blood sugar starts to go up, sort of getting ahead of the curve and preventing high blood sugars. Being able to turn off when there's hypoglycemia impending before the hypoglycemia occurs. Like, we just can't do that with shots, and we can't do that with the older pumps that don't have that technology built into it.
The other thing I thought it was so important that what Leslie said is that she had a patient that was on a hybrid closed loop, and she kept trying to outsmart it override the suggestions, and I've experienced that myself. I'm on a system called looping, and we can explain that in a sec. And every time I decide that the looping is not giving me the right suggestion, I typically get low, I over bolus, and it's just maybe like GPS when you're driving somewhere. You say, hey, it says turn right, I'm going straight.
Yeah.
And what happens? You get frickin' lost.
And I've seen that with a lot of my patients. I think that's a really good tip for those of you that may already be on these systems, is that you can't outsmart them. They work best when you're super honest with them, essentially. You're honest with them about how many carbs you're eating, you're honest with them about what your blood sugar is, you're not trying to put in fake carbs or all these things. It ends up confusing the algorithm.
Yeah, I think as the algorithms get more and more advanced,
Yeah.
like you want to, like less and less can we try to trick them. And as Trish says, you can't trick them, you can only confuse them. And as you sort of like add, if you're trying to fake bolus or fake carbs or like do different things, then the algorithm takes that into account, but it doesn't know what you're doing. So then the next time it's going to give you the wrong bolus. So I think that's something that both people living with diabetes and we as providers and everybody are going to have to kind of get used to, saying like, look, a little bit of it is sort of letting go of some of that, management and letting the algorithm do its work and sort of trusting it. And the algorithms also tend to learn as they go. So whatever's, the first day it starts, it's going to be better the second day and better the third day. And so it does take a little bit of time in some cases, but the more you let it learn, the faster it'll kind of be working appropriately.
Some of us old timers have to let control go.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what
And that's hard.
That's what my ex-wife said about me. She really did. Tricia, tell us about, we probably don't have time to speak about each system, but go through a couple of them so people have an idea.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of systems on the market now, which is exciting. I think for people with type 1, choices are always great. So Medtronic has a system, Tandem has a system, Omnipod, the iLet, there's looping, which Steve is doing, and it's kind of a lot to go through all of them at once. But essentially, I would say most of my patients are using either Tandem Control-IQ, which is a traditional pump with insulin tubing that does a wonderful job of controlling the blood sugars. Omnipod, the difference there is it's a patch pump. I would say that's one of the biggest differences. There's a few differences in algorithms and the way that they control their blood sugar and the way that they bolus for high blood sugars and things like that. That's a little too much for us to get into. But Omnipod is the patch pump. Tandem actually now just recently had a pump approved that's almost a patch pump-ish. It's a tiny little pump that's kind of acts like a patch pump.
Yeah, it's called Mobi if you want to
That's called
look it up.
Mobi.
How does it stick to your body?
So it sticks to your body still with a little patch, basically, and it still has kind of an infusion site there.
I see.
It's a very short, it's like a 5-inch, 4 or 5-inch infusion. So you can basically put the pump and the infusion set right next to each other and wear it on the body rather than having a tube coming out of your pocket and catching on door frames and stuff, in theory.
And my understanding is that it's kind of the next step towards Tandem coming out with their own patch, fully kind of patch pump. Looping, I think there are a lot of benefits to looping because looping is a DIY, do-it-yourself automated insulin delivery system that you can do with a variety of different insulin pumps, but it has some more parameters to it that the patient can control, I think, compared to some of the other pumps out there that kind of have set parameters that you don't have as much wiggle room with. I think that's one of the benefits to looping.
Especially during exercise.
Yes.
And because it's developed by software that's not FDA approved, I'm using the G7 with my looping now.
Right.
And all the other companies that have to go through the FDA, as we spoke about the last session, it takes time to go through the FDA.
Right. And then lastly, the iLet system, which is the newest one to come to market. And I think this one's a little bit unique because in this system, it is a traditional pump that has tubing with it. But in this system, you actually don't count carbs or enter your carbs or your blood sugars for a correction, for example, into your pump at all. So literally you put your weight in when you start on the pump and then you tell it when you're eating, but you don't tell it what you're eating. So the advantage is that, like some people that freaks them out, not being able to kind of correct a high blood sugar and things like that, and not being able to have that control. Other people say, great, let me let me not do anything except tell it I'm eating. And so there's pluses and minuses to each system. And to be honest, I don't have a favorite when I'm prescribing them. It's really what fits each individual.
I think the new iLet pump, just because it's newer and people I think are interested in it, and we don't have a ton of experience because it was just FDA approved. And we were one of the research sites here at UC San Diego for their big pivotal trial, which is what they submit to the FDA before they get approval. So we have some like early experience just through that trial.
Yeah, you have some of the most experience of any provider.
Anyone who's been use it. And what I would say is, and this is sort of what Trish is alluding to, is that like for that pump in particular, like the people who did really, really well were people who were either didn't really want to like engage that much. They said, great, put this thing on me. I'll tell it when I'm gonna eat a meal, but otherwise I'm not gonna stress about it. I'm gonna let the pump work. Or people that were used to doing more but were willing to kind of let go and let the pump do that work. They did really, really well. And the people that maybe that pump isn't the right fit for are the people who are used to sugar surfing and micro dosing and trying to hit 99% time in range. And I think that a lot of it was sort of more like the approach to diabetes care, but there's a lot of people out there, I know they exist in the world, who have type 1, who would love to be able to put on a pump and say, this is my body weight, start the pump, I'll tell it when I'm gonna eat, and then I'm gonna not really think about it. Yeah. So I think it's gonna be a sort of a game changer for those people who like don't wanna do all the rest.
Well, it's a game changer for, let's say, primary care doctors who take care of type 1s in areas where there's not subspecialty groups. Yeah. And they don't have to learn that much. They just say, okay, let's go there. The company has support folks. Put in your weight and go.
Yeah, no, I agree. Those are excellent points. And I think just, again, options are what are so awesome about what we have now with technology. On another note with technology, there's a question here about someone who's newly diagnosed 8 weeks along, which I think is so cool that you're already here kind of taking control of your diabetes and learning so much. But it said, and I think this question actually applies to everyone. So it says, what should my goal be in terms of a range or blood sugar percentage? And worried whether they're being too aggressive or not. So this kind of makes me think about CGM a little bit, which is not a new technology, obviously. But what is new about CGM is that in the diabetes world, from the doctor perspective now, we are really focusing on time and range on the CGM and kind of moving away from A1C, which is mind-blowing and exciting. But I think for all of you out there, I think it is important to know what time and range is and to start paying attention to it and thinking about it, because it is in a lot of ways more accurate than your A1C. Can you guys talk to us about time and range and what our goals are?
Yeah, I'll just say it gives us a lot more information than the A1C. And Schaefer and I are going to do a presentation tomorrow, but why don't you start off, Schaefer?
Yeah, I mean, so and by the way, to learn more about like CGM stuff, if you're either relatively newly diagnosed, or you haven't used a CGM, or if you have a CGM and you really want to learn how to engage more with it and kind of understand these numbers, Steve and I did a talk before that's recorded on the TCYD Vault called Think Like an Endo.
Think Like an Endo, yeah.
And we kind of just walked through everything about the CGM download and how to read it and how to make changes, make sense of that stuff. So I encourage you to check that out. But the CGM is able to give us these time and range metrics, and the time and range is sort of traditionally defined. It's a percentage of your day. It's a percentage of your time that you're within certain blood glucose levels. And the target range is generally agreed to be between 70 and 180 milligrams per deciliter. So that's kind of the goal range. So that's, if you're looking at your CGM report, that's the green area that you're trying to get into. You want to get as much time in that range as possible. And we shoot for at least 70%. So generally, the more time in that range you can be, the better. But that's sort of a general goal, is to get to about 70%.
Yeah, and 70% is, correct me on this because my math,
to do the math,
17 and a half hours a day. So that if you think about it, that's plenty of time to be outside that range and be acceptable. Now, I really think along with time and range, they should always say time below range, right?
That's something A1C cannot tell us.
Yes.
Is your time below range.
And the other metric that...
Well, the time below range is, the time that you're less than 70, right?
And very low is less than 55.
Very low. So those are, we talk about time and range a lot, but time below, as Steve's saying, time below range is just as important because we don't want time below range. We don't want those
Yeah.
lows less than 70. So you want more in the green, and you don't want time in that red zone.
The person that asked that question said, what is safe? Because Schaefer and I are going to show a patient tomorrow that had really good time in range, but super high time below range. And I should mention that 1% represents 15 minutes. So if your time below range is 4%, that means you're below 70 1 hour a day on average for the length of that download for your CGM. So that's the limit that's acceptable, 4% or less. And if you think about it, that's an hour a day below 70. That's the maximum low. So you can be good at time and range, but also have too much time below range.
Yeah. And for all of these CGM systems on their apps, you can pull up your own time and range and follow it. So you can usually set a parameter like I want to look at my time and range for the last 2 weeks, or if you want to look at your time and range for the last 3 months, that gives you a really good idea of kind of what your A1C would be.
Talk about the GMI.
Yeah, the glucose management indicator, the GMI, is basically an estimated A1C. So it says if you took that time in range and you applied it to 3 months, what would your A1C be if you had that time in range for 3 months? And to me, that GMI, when I see it on our downloads, it's more accurate than the A1C. The A1C blood test has a lot of problems with it. If you have kidney problems or anemia or all sorts of other reasons, it can be inaccurate. So looking at that time in range and looking at the glucose management indicator, the GMI, can give you a really good idea about how your control is going.
And you can follow it a lot, in a lot shorter time frame. The A1C, really, we talk about it, it's an average of 2 to 3 months, but most people don't get A1Cs more than every 3 to 6 months. So if you're waiting 6 months to know how your blood sugar control is doing, that's like way too long.
Right.
At CGM, you can say, okay, how's my blood sugar this week? How does that compare to last week? How is this month compared to last month? What changes did I make that, may have affected me in one way or the other? And that's the beauty of CGM that we can't get any other way.
Yeah, the other metric that you get on a CGM download relates to glycemic variability. We don't want people, and myself, up and down all day long. We'd rather have it like this. And the better your time in range, the better your variability.
Yeah.
So everything kind of is related. The more time in range should mean less time above range, hopefully less time below range, more glycemic variability. So it's really a much more valuable piece of information than an A1C that just gives you an idea of what your average blood sugar has been for 3 months. And as you said, Tricia, they've had problems with measuring it accurately.
Right. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these other questions here. This one question says, my daughter was diagnosed with type 1 in January at 17 years old. Our son was screened in March through TrialNet, which is one of the places where you can screen family members, and was negative. How often do we need to screen him? He's 19. And this question, I think, is a really good question. Do you need to screen just once? Do you need to keep screening? And I think back in the day, there was kind of this choice, should we screen or not screen? And everybody kind of left it up to their own individual choices, which it still is. But nowadays, screening has a lot bigger implications because of teplizumab, the new medication now, which can slow the onset and progression of type 1 diabetes. I think this has really changed things. So can we talk about how and when to screen and why it matters even more now?
Yeah, I would say in terms of screening, because of teplizumab, we are actually having to figure to answer these questions. And there's not, first of all, I don't think we know the answer. We're starting to put together some ideas and some guidelines in terms of how to screen, how often to screen, how often to rescreen. And so right now, I think this is kind of an evolving topic. So it's a really great question, and I think it's one that maybe different people might disagree on. But in general, when we're screening for having diabetes in the future, so if you're a first-degree relative of someone with type 1 diabetes and you get screened, that screen consists of a blood test where we're looking for circulating autoantibodies. These are generally up to 4 or so different antibodies that can predict the risk of developing type 1 diabetes. And if you have multiple of those antibodies that come back positive, then you actually do have type 1 diabetes. And so you're in that early sort of stage 1, phase 1 type 1 diabetes that's, preclinical, your blood sugars are normal, but your risk of actually developing diabetes with high blood sugars down the road approaches 100% over time. So we can basically say you have diabetes even though maybe your blood sugars are great. And that's the time when we can actually intervene with teplizumab. So that's why we're screening people now. If you have more of those antibodies that are positive, then your sort of risk of developing diabetes goes up. And if you just have one out of those 4 antibodies positive, it's not quite as clear. You still are at high risk, but it's not, the timeline changes, your risk of developing actual, clinical diabetes changes. So it gets a little technical, but if you have none of those antibodies, as an adult, it's unlikely that later on you'll actually develop multiple antibodies. So some people would say you don't need to rescreen at all. Other people would say it may be reasonable to rescreen a year or 2 or 3 down the road, and if at that time the antibodies remain negative, then there's no purpose to rescreen after that.
Yeah, I think he finally got to your question. But thanks for the other information.
Yeah.
No, I think that from what I've heard, and I'm not the expert on this answer, but what you said is the younger you are, the more rescreening 2 to 3 years, because like the peak age is 2 to 3, and then 6 to 7 when the antibodies are there in the blood at the highest level. 19, you're negative, and I agree with Schaefer. Probably should get tested at least one more time in a couple of years, and if that's negative too, then you probably don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, and again, if you said that your son was 4, then I would say definitely need to rescreen, a couple years down the road.
Yep.
But as an adult, probably not as many times.
Okay. There's another question here which I think applies to a lot of people. It says, I have problems with scar tissue after 48 years of insulin shots and 2 years on a pump and CGM. Sometimes the CGM is not correct or insulin absorption is low. Suggestions. So can we talk about scar tissue can be an issue, but can we also talk about kind of where people can wear these devices? Because I think nowadays it gets confusing. If one CGM is only approved to wear on the arm, what does that mean? How do you talk to patients about that?
Well, I should at least tell you, go on our website and watch the diabetes device fashion show that I did with Dr. Pettis, and I was wearing like 6 devices in different areas. I would say this, that with the CGM sensors, you can put them anywhere you can reach, any place that's comfortable. Of course, that's not insulin delivery, but they are smaller now, and even though the company says you put it on the back of your arm, for example, or your stomach, you don't have to.
And the only reason they say that is because all the trials they did to get it approved, that's where it was.
Yeah.
So it really doesn't mean it doesn't work anywhere else.
And in terms of insulin, that's one reason I like the Omnipod. Right now, I'm wearing mine on my upper back, and you can, once you pull off the little stickers, you can put it anywhere. And even infusion lines could be put in places like the inside of the upper part of your leg, little fat area there, the triceps fat pad, the upper outer quadrants of your rear end. So you really have to be, thinking about new areas, but don't be limited to the classic spots.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Okay, this is an important question. Why did some type 1s with decent control get complications compared to others who have not been under good control? I think this is a great question because I think, at least when a lot of my patients who have complications from diabetes, they tend to take on a lot of guilt and shame about that, as if it's their fault or, they kind of did this to themselves. And that's not always the case. I think, there's a lot of reasons for complications. One is that it may have been that back when you were diagnosed, we didn't have all the technology. I mean, you and Jeremy went through all that history.
Yeah.
This morning, looking at kind of the earliest glucose meters and things like that. I mean, we literally didn't have the technology to know better, the technology and the data to know better. So that's one reason. And another reason is there's probably some underlying genetic factors that we don't have teased out yet that make some people, because 2 people that have the exact same control, some could get kidney complications and another one might not.
Yeah.
And that feels unfair,
Yeah, I think what I heard of that question also is, why is it that some people with terrible control never get complications, and others with much better control do, and we can't answer that question.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that by far, the duration and severity of high blood sugar over the years will be the main driver for complications. And I got diabetes in 1970 in the dark ages, and I'm thinking about my own complications, and I don't blame myself anymore. I got on the couch, Jeremy was sitting right there, and there were a lot of issues. My doctor didn't know anything about diabetes. I didn't know anything about diabetes. Technology was terrible, and so anyway, yeah, you're right. In general, sometimes I have a few patients who have had A1Cs above 10% for 20 years with no complications. They got lucky.
Yeah,
But
it's a
Yeah,
gamble.
you got lucky.
But I can't explain why.
Yeah. I think there probably is some underlying genetic factors that people are more predisposed to,
Definitely.
having complications from high blood sugars, so that we can't really figure out at this point. But one day we'll know. Okay, here's another question. Going back to kind of the hybrid closed loop and technology, how can you make sure, this is a big question, how can you make sure all your settings are correct on these pumps and devices? So maybe we could give some general tips. And I guess I'll start with just saying what we said in the beginning, which is it's very hard to know if your settings are correct if you're trying to outsmart these pumps or messing with them. So if you're putting in a lot of fake carbs, if you're trying to mess with what these pumps are doing, it's going to actually make it harder to figure out the settings.
Yeah, I can start with the basal. You can do bolus maybe. But, it's a great question because your settings have to be right. And what are the settings? Everyone has a basal rate, kind of like the old days when they didn't communicate the pump. And that's not even the most important setting in my book, because these systems have automatic basal rate delivery. And even if your basal rate is set a little bit off, your pump will suspend if you're getting too much insulin. It'll give you more. So you should really look at your download to see how hard your pump is working to keep you at goal. And I think the best way to test it is to fast as long as you can. Typically overnight, have an early dinner and just see what the algorithm does to your blood sugar overnight. And you can even try fasting during the day with normal daily activities. If your blood sugar just starts to creep up on its own, that you may need to change your insulin sensitivity factor. And it's also called a correction factor. And if your blood sugar start to creep down on its own, then you need to change. You got to make yourself more sensitive to insulin, so your algorithm doesn't give you as much for any given blood sugar. Might be getting complicated, but I personally believe the insulin sensitivity factor on the hybrid closed loop system is your most important settings. Bolusing is not that different from before, right?
Yeah, for bolusing, the answer to the question is, how do you know if the settings are right? Is look at your CGM downloads and see how your control is and see if you're having problems. And if you're having low blood sugars overnight, then maybe that's your basal rate. And if you're having low blood sugars after meals, maybe you're bolusing too much, so you have to adjust those specific settings to address those specific problems.
The insulin to carb rate.
Yeah,
I think your Think Like an Endo session that is on the website that you can watch is a good one for that, on how to look at your CGM data and kind of adjust.
Because we touch on the basal stuff, the bolus stuff, carb ratios, how to adjust all that. So I think there are a lot of settings. And so, but I think ultimately is whatever you're setting working for you, and if not, then think about, okay, where is that issue? Is it my basal rate? Is it my sensitivity factor? Is it carb ratio? And then the other side is the settings for the CGM that we always talk about, alerts and alarms and all these other components in the CGM settings. So those you should definitely review. And it's really important that you go in, you take a look at those settings in your CGM and understand where your alerts and alarms are set. Make sure they're turned on first of all.
Yeah.
And then find some good levels where those are going to be actually useful levels for you to have on. And everyone's a little bit different, but as a starting point, a lot of times we'll recommend a low alert at 80. And that's because 80 isn't low yet, but if you want to know that you're getting low, so you want to get that alert before you actually go low, so you can do something about it if you need to treat it or if you need to check and see how much insulin's on board, or which direction the trend arrow is going on the CGM, and make an informed decision. You want to know about it before you're actually low. And on the flip side, on the high side, everyone has different cutoffs. 180, 200 are reasonable options. But some higher blood sugar where you actually want to know about it and may want to do something about it, like maybe take a correction insulin or go for a walk or something where you're actually going to try to bring that down. But those need to be on, so that's another type of setting to consider.
Yeah, people don't talk about those much, and some folks have their upper limit at 150, 160 during the day. Some CGMs allow you to have 2 different time periods, and then higher at night so it doesn't bug you while you're sleeping.
Right. Those are all good tips. And I wish we had more time to talk, but we actually blew through this session really quickly. So we do have to wrap up, but thank you all so much for joining us. And I'll just say, if you have other questions, you would not believe the amount of material that is on the website. So check out the video vault. You can search by topic and hopefully get a lot of your questions answered there.
And we have different blogs on our website under different topics that you can always ask your question, and we get back to everybody. So.
Thanks, guys. Thanks
All right,
for being
thanks,
here.
Tricia.
Bye, everyone.